you asking us to share our data in our recent food insecurity study. Is there a clicker? That would be great. Thank you. Oh, yes.
Good morning, everybody. Thank you for allowing us to share this information with you guys. It'll be an eye-opener.
So say your name.
Wes Pereira.
So let me just start by making sure we're all on the same page on how we define food security or food insecurity. So we use the USDA definition, which is if a household is food insecure, there isn't enough food in that household for everybody to live a healthy, active lifestyle. And within that food insecure category, there are people who have low food security, meaning they might need to make some compromises in the kinds of foods that they're eating, maybe less healthy foods. And then we have people who have very low food security, and these are folks who are skipping meals, losing weight, going hungry, sometimes going without food for whole days at a time because there wasn't enough money for food. Whoops, that's the wrong way. This is the second year we've done this study. This year we worked with Ward Research and our same researcher, Dr. Catherine Perkle from Perkle Epidemiology. We did a study of almost 1,100 residents statewide. We really worked hard this year to be sure we had enough respondents from each county, so at least 200 respondents from each county. And then we weighted the results to make sure we could generalize the results statewide, but also looking at each county specifically. So I'll jump right in. Key findings. Overall, we found that 32% of our households are food insecure, meaning 32% of households aren't getting enough food for everybody to live a healthy, active lifestyle. 2/3 of that number, or 1 in 5, are in that very low food security category. So again, these are people who are not getting enough to eat, skipping meals, losing weight, not just making compromises. And 11% of our households went for whole days without eating, some or most months of the year. I'll pause there for a second because I think that's, again, we saw something similar to this in our last study. We had 10%, that number's ticked up slightly, all within the margin of error. But again, 1 in 10 of our residents are not eating for whole days because there wasn't enough money for food. We looked at age cohorts, and our young adults are at the greatest risk for food insecurity. More than half of young adults age 18 to 29 are food insecure. Food security generally grows with age as people get more assets, but still, even our kupuna, about 1 in 5 of those age 65 plus are food insecure. So these are high levels across age cohorts. We also looked at race and ethnicity, and again, this is similar to what we found last time. Some, and I think we may have discussed this in our last time we met, but one of the issues that we've had using national data is they tend to aggregate Asian American, Pacific Islander, and Native Hawaiians all into one category. And as you guys can see, we all know that doesn't make a lot of sense for Hawaii, but we have some ethnicities such as Japanese and Korean with less than half the level of food insecurity as Filipinos, Hispanics, Native Hawaiians. So this is something that one of the reasons why I thought it was really important to do Hawaii-specific data and get an understanding for what's happening here in Hawaii.
Oh, never mind. You don't have any white. Is that non-Hispanic?
Non-Hispanic white, yes.
Okay, because a lot of white people are hungry too.
Yeah, 33%.
Yeah.
So, I think one of the things that we're really seeing is, again, these levels are unacceptable across the board, but we do know that there are folks who are disproportionately affected. And so as we really try to craft our own strategies to try to fight food insecurity, these are some of the things that we're looking at to make sure we're finding everyone. Other key demographics at especially high risk of food insecurity, those enrolled in higher education, 58% were food insecure, and those who identify as something other than straight or LGBTQIA population, 41% food insecure. We also looked at household income this time and saw a big difference at $90,000 household income. So statewide, households that made more than $90,000, 16% were food insecure, compared to those who were below that range, about 44% were food insecure. We also looked at health impacts and how health is related to food insecurity, and we know from lots and lots of research that food insecurity and health are very linked, especially with chronic health conditions like diabetes, cancer, heart disease. So we looked at this specifically for Hawaii. Some of the findings were 37% of adults in food insecure households have anxiety or depression, about twice as many as those who are in food secure households. Same thing, 17% reported gastrointestinal problems as compared to 8% of those who are food secure. And then this last piece is also quite distressing. 41% of adults in food insecure households delayed or skipped medical treatment or care because there wasn't enough money. And this is something that we see over and over. We think of these as kind of impossible choices, right? Okay, do I put food on the table for my family, or do I go to the doctor? If I only have a little bit of money, what am I going to spend it on? Oftentimes we're seeing people who are skipping, especially medications that might be intended to manage a chronic disease because it doesn't feel acute, whereas making sure your kids get enough to eat tonight is might feel more important. And you shouldn't have to choose. But what ends up happening is their diseases progress, and we end up spending much more money on treatment, hospitalization, that kind of thing, because people had to make these choices and aren't able to take care of themselves. This one is also very difficult, our keiki. So we found that 34% of our children were food insecure. This is up from what we saw in our last report. Last time, 29% of our children were food insecure, so this one up by about 5 percentage points. This is still within the margin of error, but in every way that we track children, we saw everything go up. Another one stat you see here that's really hard are adult caregivers, so parents and caregivers. Adults in households children in households with children, 34% of the children are food insecure, but 45% of the adults are food insecure. And the reason, those of us who are parents will know, it makes a lot of sense, right? People will go without to make sure their kids have enough to eat. And this is something we hear over and over. Earlier this summer, we were talking to a dad, father of 4, on Oahu, lived in Waianae, and he was sharing with us that his SNAP benefits ran out before the end of the month. And I remember really clearly, it was like June 30th, we were talking to him. He said, I didn't eat last night. I'm not going to eat again until my SNAP benefits come through. I need to make sure my kids have enough to eat. And I don't want them to know. So I just tell them that I'm intermittent fasting. And these are the things that are happening to our parents and caregivers. So this is something that we really are quite focused on. How do we take care of our keiki and our caregivers? 11% of our kids are in that very highly food insecure, skipping meals, going hungry because there's not enough money for them to eat. And 51% of multi-generational households were also food insecure, so another group that's especially high risk of food insecurity. And this year we also looked at some of the programs that exist to try to address food insecurity, so especially for our kids, there are some USDA programs, free and reduced school meals. and to see if there's things that we can learn. We did find that 41% of households with children participated in the school lunch program, but only 31% of those kids participated in breakfast. So we think that could be an opportunity if we can get more kids able to have breakfast at school. We could maybe close that gap. And then also there's certain summer meal programs, again, through the USDA Kaua for Keiki here in Kauai, run by Malama Kauai. And we found that of people who wanted to get access to a summer meal program but could not, 68% of those folks were food insecure. So we're really looking here at opportunities for more kids to get breakfast at school, the need to increase food support programs during the summer, and then just how important it is to have year-round access for kids. We also looked at SNAP, and particularly at people who applied for SNAP but did not get it. So in the last year, 16% of Hawaii residents total applied for SNAP, 11% were approved, and 5.5% were denied. Of those folks that were denied, 83% were food insecure. So these are people who make too much money to receive and get SNAP benefits, but are still food insecure. So this is one of the places where food banks and the Charitable Food Network can step up to help ensure folks are getting access to the food that they need. Here's another that will not be a surprise at all for Kauai, but we did look to see, are there other ways that people access food who are food insecure? So we looked at hunting, fishing, raising animals, and growing food. And unsurprisingly, food insecure households are significantly more likely to get food in a significant way through hunting, fishing, or raising animals. And the sharing network is also quite important. So communities sharing food with each other. Again, for our food insecure households, this is a much more important way that folks are getting food. And finally, we looked at disaster preparedness. So it's another important role for the food bank. We serve both in blue skies and in gray. And one of our findings, only 15% of Hawaii households feel prepared for a disaster. And here in Hawaii, we know technically we're all supposed to have 14-day supply of food and water, which is quite a lot, especially the water per person. And among our food insecure households, only 6% are prepared. And the biggest reason for that was the lack of financial resources. So this is another thing that we are really thinking about at the food bank. If there were a disaster, our food insecure households, especially folks that we're serving today, they do not have enough supplies to wait for help for 2 weeks. So we'll need to be really thinking about how we serve those folks immediately. We also looked at geography. So we looked by county what food insecurity levels looked like, ranged from 25% in Honolulu County, 32% here on Kauai, 41% in Maui County, up to 43% on Hawaii Island. Again, across the board, quite high levels. It's a higher level we saw in Kauai this year as compared to last year. We think part of that has to do with we really focused on making sure we got a big sample size for Kauai. So we think this year's numbers are representative of what we're really seeing out there. So specifically for Kauai, it's about 23,000 individuals we estimate are food insecure. Nearly half of the households on Kauai who are food insecure are facing that very low food security measure. So again, skipping meals, going without. We know, I'm not telling you guys anything you don't know, but the cost of food, shipping, and transportation continue to make access difficult for our families. And we'll talk about this more in a second, but one of the things we're really focusing on is our keiki. So we now have a pantry in every DOE school on Kauai, including Niihau. Hawaii is one of the most, if not the most expensive place in the country to live. And our salaries don't meet the cost of living. So if we look back at our food insecure, again, 32% of our households are food insecure, but we also have this category called marginally food secure. So these are households which are categorized together with a food secure group, but they're worried. So these are people who might never have actually skipped a meal, but they're worried that they might not have enough. So when we ask, there's like an 18-question survey, they might respond positively as food insecure to 1, 2, or 3 questions. So not enough to actually consider that household food insecure, but these are folks who are on the margin, and they are at risk of becoming food insecure. So that's another 20% of our households make up that category. So all in all, about half of households in Hawaii are either food insecure or on the edge. And food insecurity has, a lot of broader impacts beyond the obvious. So I think, we all understand, right? We need food. It's one of our, key needs. But one of the real issues that we're seeing with food insecurity is it has broad impacts across someone's entire life. So we talked briefly about some of the health impacts, and this can be quite severe. There are studies that show the amount of additional medical expenditures people spend on average per year that correlated with food insecurity across the country is about $1,800. So food insecure folks spend about $1,800 a year on average more than a non-food insecure person. This is because so highly correlated to these quite costly diseases. And we know also that when people, especially when you first start maybe sliding and things get harder and harder, one of the first things that happens is people tend to pivot towards less expensive and also less healthy foods. We know that produce, for instance, might be the first thing that falls off people's grocery list because it's expensive and maybe it doesn't last. And if I really need to watch every penny, I'm going to spend my money on things that I know will not go to waste and are less expensive. And then that can have major impacts to your health down the line. The keiki and our educational impacts is another really tough one. So we know that children who are food insecure do have poor academic outcomes. They're more likely to be hospitalized. They don't do as well in school. They tend to have anxiety, other attention disorders, more behavioral problems and social problems. And for a very young keiki, even intermittent food insecurity at a young age can actually cause permanent changes in neurological structure. So this is something that I think, again, we really need to think, how are we best serving our keiki? If you can't learn if you are hungry. So I think this is a really important impact. And then finally, there are major economic impacts to food insecurity as well. I mentioned the costs of medical care. But if we also think about investing in our workforce, again, if our kids are not able to achieve the same academic potential, if they're food insecure as those who are their food secure peers, those are kids that aren't going to have as their economic future earnings will be reduced, right? Because they weren't able to achieve the same academically as their food secure peers. And we also know that even parents who are food insecure or have food insecure children have harder time at work. We see absenteeism, presenteeism. You show up, but you maybe aren't really there because you're worried, right? You're worried about, can I put food on the table for my family tonight? So there's also significant economic impacts to food insecurity. And I bring this up because I just want to be sure that this isn't something that is just confined to food. This is an economic issue. This is truly a public health crisis, and it's an educational issue. It kind of touches every aspect of our lives. And so I think, again, very grateful to be here and be able to talk about this with you guys. I'll just talk quickly about the food bank and our, call ourselves the food bank Hui, but our network of food banks across the state. Hawaii Food Bank, directly serving the islands of Oahu and Kauai. And then we partner with the Maui Food Bank to serve Maui County and the Food Basket to serve Hawaii Island. And altogether, last year, we distributed food for more than 29 million meals across the state. We have in total about 500 partner agencies that are doing the hard work of getting food into community. These are churches, nonprofits, schools. And we also altogether held about more than 1,300 mobile distributions, so getting food into community, fresh produce into community. Here on Kauai, we have a total of 46 agency partners and 18 school pantries, the equivalent of 1.7 million meals into community last year, and 500,000 pounds of fresh produce, which is something we're really proud of. And you can see in this map, we have our agencies all across the islands. One thing that we're really proud of at Hawaii Food Bank is we can really stretch a dollar. So oftentimes we're purchasing with our partnerships through Feeding America and our sister food banks on the continent. We've been kind of adopted by these food bank consortia on the continent, so able to purchase at the container load quite inexpensively. We also work with lots of local farmers, so we're purchasing locally as well. And we like there to think of ourselves as kind of, we can be the customer of last resort because, hey, we don't care that much what we get because we're getting food out to all. So we can be really flexible on exactly what we're purchasing. We can scale up, we can scale back. If we maybe talked about one item and they don't have that because they sold it to someone, fantastic, we can do something else. So we really think we can help provide kind of a structural supports within the food system for our local agriculture. But last year we did a little study just to understand how far our dollar stretches compared to if any of us were to go to the store on our own. And we found that statewide, on average, our dollar stretches about 5.3 times as far. So we really can stretch that dollar. Last year got the equivalent of $10.4 million worth of food into community on Kauai at retail price. So it didn't cost us that much money, cost us much less, but the impact for a family, because they would have to spend their own money, is quite dramatic. I wanted to show just what we've been seeing in terms of trends here on Kauai and how much food we're getting into community. Last year we distributed just over 2 million pounds of food. That's what we were doing at the height of the pandemic. So the numbers continue to rise, and we're seeing that continue to tick up the need. And at the same time, we've seen cuts in federal programs. For instance, the Emergency Food Assistance Program, TFAP, had a specific fund called the Commodity Credit Corporation. Statewide, we received almost $4 million worth of food through that program last year. In Kauai, more than $200,000 worth of food. That program has been cut. So we are really have been in a difficult position with federal programs directly cutting access to food and funds for the food banks. And then we're also seeing federal cuts to social safety net programs like SNAP and Medicaid. And I'll just share a little bit about SNAP because I think during the government shutdown, we all had a kind of an eye-opener on just how important this program is to keeping people with enough food. So statewide, almost 170,000 individuals are on SNAP, about 86,000 households, and monthly receive $57 million in SNAP benefits each month. So this is $57 million every single month that goes into the state economy. It goes in people's EBT cards, and they go to the store and they buy food with those dollars. Here on Kauai, 4,400 households, 8,600 people, the equivalent of about 640,000 meals every month through SNAP comes into this community. So statewide, SNAP provides about 13 million meals per month. And I showed you, we're so proud of what all the food banks do together. All the food banks together, we provide about 2.4 million meals per month into communities. So SNAP provides about 5.5 times as much food into community as all the food banks together. So this is a very critical program, and so you can imagine when we went on pause, all the food banks really had to stand up to try to meet that need, but also probably not possible to fully fill that gap. And I think we are quite lucky in Hawaii. We get to work with food banks all across the country and hear what's happening all across the country. And we were very fortunate because this community really did stand up to help and ensure that people still had access to food, either directly through the food banks or by the state program to get dollars on people's EBT cards. So we knew that we only had a short window of time that we would have to stand up and support. But I think one of the things we really are worried about and need to think about it, this is a really important program and it is being cut. So several things have been happening. One is just back on October 1st, all benefits statewide dropped by about 2%, or about $8 per person. This is because of a recalculation of the thrifty meal plan, which USDA uses to say, hey, about how much should it cost you to buy food? And several years ago, thrifty meal plan was recalculated and reduced for Hawaii. So those reductions were spread out over 3 years, so about a 2% increase per year. But we just saw that last hit. So 2%, that's about $8 per person, but that really adds up, right? So $8 per person, $32 for a family. That's, gosh, I can't do the math in my head. But so times $1 million. Yes, I'm sorry. It's like $1 million a month that's not now coming into the state. And that just happens. So we're already dealing with that cut. HR 1, this is the budget reconciliation bill that was passed back in July, made some additional changes to the SNAP program, including changes to work requirements. So there are most people who are on SNAP either are work, they have kids, they're seniors, or they're veterans. And when we know that the folks that we're serving, many are on SNAP, most of them are working. A lot of times they work more than one job. They just can't quite make ends meet. But the new law did change to expand the definition of what they call able-bodied adults without dependents. So now, if you had children that were under 18, you didn't have to prove that you were working 20 hours a week. Now, if you have children that are 14, 15, 16, 17, you will have to go through those paperwork requirements. So kids, older children now may see their benefits cut if their parents are unable to fulfill those benefit requirements. Paperwork requirements. Also, older adults. It used to be if you're at age 65 or older, 55 or older, you did not have to provide paperwork. Now that age was reduced to 55. And also houseless, veterans, and children, youth aging out of foster care, age 18 to 26, they now also have to fulfill these paperwork requirements, which is a difficult thing because lots of people don't have a 9-to-5 job anymore and get a paycheck, right? We have a lot of folks that are working in the gig economy. We have people that might have their own business. We have people who don't have a lot of English, so it can be quite difficult to fulfill these paperwork requirements. They've done this in other states, and what they've found is it doesn't actually do very much at getting more people into employment, but what it does really well is get people out of SNAP. So the estimates that we receive from the state, there could be 16,000 people statewide who are older adults that could be affected by this change, 10,000 households with a dependent child age 14 or older. So our state actually got a waiver on this for a year if we can show a good faith effort that we're trying to implement it. But as we look to the future, we could see continued folks who are no longer eligible for SNAP, and then we'll need to turn to other places like the food bank in order to get enough food for their households. We're, again, Hawaii Food Bank and all of our partner agencies are really proud to be able to be in this space and help our community make sure everybody has enough to eat. We believe very strongly that food is a basic human right. Everybody should have equitable access to safe and healthy food. This isn't something that should only go to those that have enough money to buy food at the store. So this is something I think we think about quite a bit, and we're quite committed to ensuring that everybody gets that access. And our work is to really, one of the reasons we did this study is to help us understand who is most affected by food insecurity and how can we best find those folks who might be falling through the cracks. So how do we best support our keiki? We're so proud on this island to have a pantry in every single DOE school. These are places where kids can get a healthy snack during the day. They can take home food for their families for evenings and weekends. And that's something that we want to continue to replicate across our whole service area. But this is something that the Charitable Food Network really can't do alone. So we're really looking to partner with others in our space, to partner with our agencies, to partner with local government and state government, especially when we're seeing these federal cuts, really trying to see how can we, again, partner with you to see and make sure that nobody goes hungry at night. I think that's really what drives us at the food bank. We want to be sure that none of our kids, none of our kupuna, no one goes to bed hungry at night on this island, and I think we can do it. So that's all I have. Really, thank you for allowing me to be here.
Thank you, Amy, for a very powerful and important presentation, and thank you, Councilmember Bulasan, for bringing this in front of us. I think it's really critical. I want to open it up for questions and feedback from the group. Does anybody have questions?
I have a question. And first of all, thank you for being here, and thank you for what. Can you hear me? Thank you for being here, and thank you for what you all do. I just had a real simple question. I know the executive summary says there was 1,079 respondents to this survey. Do you know how many that responded here just on Kauai?
It was right around 200. It was right around 200.
Okay. I'm not questioning the numbers. I think we all agree. Your mobile food pantry. We don't see what happens at the food bank, but we have an opportunity to see the success of the mobile pantry, and Wes and his team on Kauai. It was just amazing the lines that we are witnessing currently when that pantry sets up. So the need is definitely there, but yeah, it's kind of staggering. The numbers are frightening. So thank you all. Thank you.
Vice Chair Cooley.
So it's kind of sad and bleak this time of year to get these kind of numbers, and it's been this way for a while now. The one thought I had is you see so many families and kids and kupuna affected, and during the surveys you see the numbers, but do we know if when we're doing distribution, are we reaching them, and what can we do better to reach more of them? Because I think sometimes, like after COVID and stuff, when you do these special events where people come to, a lot of the people maybe who need it the most are not necessarily coming, or for whatever reason they're not able to. If the studies tell us who they are, can we develop a system where we bring it to them, like the elderly program that brings meals to them?
So I love that program, and I think those are the kinds of things that we have to do more of. Another question that we asked in the survey that I didn't present up here is of folks who are food insecure, how many people are accessing the Charitable Food Network? And we found that only about half of the people who are food insecure are accessing the Charitable Food Network. And we ask why. The number one reason is I was ashamed or I didn't know where to get help. Now, Kauai actually had the smallest percentage of people that said they didn't know where to get help. So Kauai is doing a great job of getting the word out, but we still know that people are ashamed, or they may work, they might not have access. So there's a number of things that we're trying to do, and I think we're always open to brainstorming and finding new additional ways. So one is the mobile food pantry. So we know that there are certain areas that are underserved because maybe we don't have a pantry in an agency in that region, or maybe that agency doesn't have the capacity to be open, more than a couple days a week. So was one of our first investments, was the mobile food pantry, so we can take food to people and get healthy food right to people. Getting our school pantries, that's another, hey, we know our kids are especially at high risk of food insecurity, let's get a pantry in every school so kids all have access. And that's a place that we're really seeing a lot of success, where kids are actually reporting they feel proud to be able to bring home food for their families. I'll share a story. This is on Oahu, but we're at Dole Middle School, and a lot of times for our older kids, we have choice pantries so the kids can just pick what they want. And we used to really worry about, okay, well, what kind of food do we purchase for school pantries? Because, well, we want it to be healthy, but we also want the kids to eat it. And for younger kids, we also want to make sure that they can prepare it, because you don't know exactly what's happening in the home. So sometimes it felt like there's just this very small amount of the kinds of foods that we could buy. We ran our very first choice pantry at Olamana School on Oahu, and after a year, we had a year's worth of data of what the kids actually took. So it's a choice pantry. They can come in and take whatever they wanted. And we found, this was like mind-blowing for me, 60% of the food the kids took was fresh produce. And we were so surprised. I thought they would want,
Cheetos.
spicy Cheetos. But the kids really did want that. And so I got to see this myself at a middle school pantry. The kids came in, and they're hilarious because they're middle schoolers. And they all went for the produce first. They were taking these big things of celery. They were taking apples. We had pears. And they really liked the apples. In fact, the apples went like that. And this one boy came up and he was like, hey, where are the apples? And the teacher said, oh, I'm so sorry, the apples are gone. He's like, oh, no apples? I'm out of here. And it turned out he left. So we were all kind of cracking up. But I asked the teacher, wow, they really like the apples. She's like, this pantry has been in place for a year. She said at the beginning of the year, the kids came in and they were looking for pastries. They were looking for snacky food. We didn't have it, but we had apples and we had other, healthy food items. And by the end of the year, by the next year, that's what the kids were looking for. It was really cool to see. I saw a boy on the phone with his mom talking, okay, be sure you get some of that celery. Around the whole room, there were pictures that the kids had sent in of meals that they'd made with the food from the school. And the teachers could talk so that they're exchanging recipes. So it's really beautiful, and I think it shows, too, how food does bring us together, and it also gives access for people to do other kinds of things. The same school always has a back-to-school night in the beginning of the year. Usually, they told me they get about 20 families. This year, they had a meal. They did a spaghetti meal because the food that was provided, and over 100 families came. And they had to run back and get more food from the pantry and cook up more. But they also had brought out different community organizations to talk to the families about different services that were out there. And so they were able to really start to get people connected with other things. Another thing, again, because we had this pantry at the school, we were able to we had a good relationship with the principal. So we were able to talk to the principal and showed her, hey, you have I was showing that slide about 41% of kids on school lunches, but only 31% were on breakfast. There's that gap. And this is the school that had one of the biggest gaps. So we talked to her, and she said, okay, well, let me try something. They tried this thing called breakfast after the bell. So instead of having to get to school early to eat, they had, like, at that first recess period, they had breakfast. And she said it was so amazing. It wasn't actually that difficult because the cafeteria staff, instead of packing all the food away, they just packed it into containers. It just that part didn't take any extra time. And then took about 15 minutes at recess. Someone had to just swipe the cards, and kids got breakfast. And she told us, the reason these kids weren't getting breakfast before is because they were walking their siblings to the elementary school and waiting with their siblings until the parents came. So by the time, the adult supervision came. So by the time they got to their school in middle school, they missed breakfast. And I just really broke my heart, right? That we're asking these kids, they're taking care of their families, they're taking care of their younger brothers and sisters, and they weren't getting breakfast. But there was this change that we could make. Then all of a sudden they can get breakfast and they can take home food to their to their families and their parents. So those are the kinds of things that we are really trying to explore more of, like how do we think creatively to address people and get food where they are. You also saw, groups that especially high risk are young adults and folks enrolled in higher ed. We're really proud of our pantry, our partnership with Hōʻike Community College. They have an incredible choice pantry. If you haven't been there to see it, I totally recommend go check it out. It's a really amazing place, and same thing. It's really developed a community where people are coming in. The faculty now started donating clothes, so if people need clothes for an interview, they can come get it there. They also started donating diapers. They have a little cakey corner where the kids can come do things. And we can provide the food. So it's been really a beautiful thing.
Thank you so much. That's so good to hear. Thank you, Chair. Chair.
Councilmember Kaneshiro?
Yeah, you just touched on it a little bit. I was kind of surprised on the slide 5 and slide 7 regarding food insecurity by age. Mm-hmm. And the 18 to 29 group was the highest. And then the other fact was 58% of those currently enrolled in higher education were food insecure. Can you expand on that, or?
Yeah, and that was similar to what we saw last time as well. But I think there's, our young adults are quite challenged, and we're seeing that kind of across the country, in fact, right? Kids are having a hard time getting jobs out of school. The cost of housing is so difficult. So if you're just starting out, it's really hard for people to, get on their own. And if they don't have the ability to, stay with their parents or stay with grandparents, what people tend to do, again, if you're kind of looking at your budget, there are big chunks, right? Your cost of your rent and your utilities, transportation. The only thing that people feel like they can shrink is their food budget. So that's one of the reasons we're seeing that. Older adults do tend to eat, I think we worry a lot about our kupuna, and still 1 in 5 kupuna are food insecure. So that is still quite a high level. But in terms of housing security, job security, it's just, people, as they get older, they do tend to become less food insecure because they might become more established in their job, have ability to get housing and that kind of thing.
I guess I was curious too. I mean, the older ages, they have Meals on Wheels and those type of programs. So I was wondering if those type of meals were skewing the results for the elderly because they're actually getting meals from all these other services versus person in college or trying to find a job. You don't necessarily have that type of service that brings them meals or cheap meals or.
That's a really good point, and that is one of the actually issues that we've been thinking about with this study. It's hard to know if somebody is food secure, are they food secure because they're totally fine, or are they food secure because there are programs in place that are making them feel that way? So we're actually talking about next year trying to get a little bit better into those questions about, okay, if you are food secure, are there any programs that you might be participating in? So I think that's a really good point.
Councilmember Holland?
Thank you guys so much for everything you do. Question about 31% of children participating in school breakfast being lower than lunch. Do you have any idea why? What are the reasons for that? How do we encourage more? I mean, you gave the great example of changing the time, but just wondering overall why less access to breakfast? Or
I think it's actually a phenomenon you kind of see across the country, and a lot of places there are some tried and true things you can do to increase participation in school breakfast. I think the biggest one is in many places and for lots of schools in Hawaii, you have to get to school quite early in order to get breakfast because the breakfast service closes. So that can be hard, right? It can be hard if you're responsible for getting to school on your own. It can be hard if you don't have transportation. There's all kinds of reasons why it's difficult. So I think that's probably the biggest reason. It's just difficult for kids to get there.
And then the 68% of those who wanted summer food support but did not receive it. Where do you apply for summer food support, and how do you not receive it? Like what determines that?
So there's a few different programs that the DOE and the USDA have to kind of pivot, because we know with so many kids, maybe the 2 meals that they get a day at school might be their primary form of food. Like we're hearing in lots of kids that they go home, they're not getting maybe not a meal or not a full meal, and they're not eating again until breakfast. So that makes weekends, breaks, and summers kind of their most critical time. So there are some programs the USDA and DOE has. So there are some schools that will continue to serve food during the summer. It's called, I can't remember what that program is called. I'll think of it. We also work to, and other nonprofits also will do hot meals for kids in different in different places. So the kids need to come and eat meals there. That can be pretty difficult, right? Because how do you get there if maybe your grandma is watching you and maybe she doesn't drive? So that can be difficult for kids to access. And then in rural areas, including on Kauai, you can have Kaua for Keiki, which is this is a USDA-funded program that allows for a food box. So it's enough food for a week so that people can come get access to it. But there's only certain places that you can have Kaua for Keiki. On Oahu, for instance, it can only be in the rural zip codes, and you also have to be, I'm trying to remember, at least a mile away from any other provider. So it's quite complicated to kind of work through exactly how to make, that first is called Seamless Summer Option. So kids can go to school and get meals, Seamless Summer Option. There's this, the SFSP, Summer Food Service Program, that either does the meals that we provide or other nonprofit provides, and then the Kaua for Keiki food boxes. But again, back to the same reason why we know programs like the programs for seniors work is we're getting food to people where they are, and so that can be really challenging for families, if you're working to get your kids access. Do you want to add anything to that, Wes, for Kauai? Because I know we did the summer program.
Yeah, so we have been in the past couple of years talking with DOE and seeing how we can, the easiest way would get them to open up more schools during the summer, right? That would be the simplest thing, but they have a lot of obstacles in their way. A lot of the cafeteria workers work on a 10-month contract, so summers are off, so they have to have the school decide. Last year, I think they only had Kapaa Middle and Kapaa Elementary schools open during the summer, so they left a huge gap all over the island for kids needing food. Alama Kauai stepped up and does the Kau for Keiki program, which is the food kits, and they do pretty good, but still we're hearing that there are gaps on the island that we need to help fill. One of that is out on the North Shore and the west side and south sides. So we are like talking with DOE, talking with other partners across the island to try and address this. And this is something that I want to share every time, is that Amy has kind of like tasked us to really, like the study says, you know, find the gaps, find the areas that we're missing people, and try to do our best to try and address that. It's not just food banking of old, right? Like we get all the food we can, we just throw them at whoever shows up. That's not how it's done anymore. It's methodical. It's based on research, and I think we do a way better job as food bankers today.
Councilmember Carvalho?
Yeah. First of all, Mahalo. Appreciate the discussion. I'm on the Hawaii Food Bank Hui and honing in on just a couple questions, but and the numbers. So what I see here, there's 64 agency partners and pantries, and just kind of clarifying that. And the numbers kind of increase. You know, how does that stay solid? And then the 2.1 million pounds of food current just for this time frame, right? That's what I'm looking at. And then the mobile pantry deliveries, 110. So I just wanted to talk about a little bit about that and how that's, you know, either increasing, decreasing, what we need to do to support that part.
So those are fiscal 25 numbers. So that was July 2024 through June 2025.
Oh, okay,
so that's our
that's
most recent
that time.
fiscal year. Yep, 2.1 million pounds of food, which is the most food we've ever distributed on Kauai.
Kauai, yeah.
I think the height of the pandemic, we hit 2 million pounds of food that year. So we're just last year edged up over the volume of food that we distributed during the height of the pandemic. Wes can speak to our agency partners.
Yeah.
It's been fairly stable, but it's been growing. And then that does include our 18 DOE pantries.
So the increase in pantries or decrease happens with like some of the churches that come on board to fill a need in a specific area might not have the staff or volunteers to continue the program. Somebody retires or moves or something, and they've had some difficulty in finding younger volunteers, and I think churches will agree that that's a problem across the board, right? So sometimes they fall off, and then as food bankers, we see that that's a gap, and now we gotta find somebody else. There's some partner in a community that is willing to kind of step up and do the pantry. It's a lot of work. They're the ones that do the client contact. And as far as the poundage, Amy's right. It is the most that we've done. And you guys have been to the warehouse. It's a little warehouse. So the food comes in, goes out really quickly. I can share with you, at this point in this fiscal year, we're already beyond 1.2 million, I think.
Oh.
So I think annualized, we're looking at being well above the 2.1, and it's just, that's what it looks like today. We're just moving a lot more food. Of course, there might have been a little bit of bump just during the month of November, but not much.
Right.
It's just a steady growth of need, I think, that what we're seeing across the island.
No, I just appreciate that. I just want to kind of clarify the numbers and see what for Kauai and how everything is. Good job.
Chair Raposo?
Thank you. And I think the mobile pantry is probably one of the reasons why you're seeing that constant growth, because, again, the lines are long, and the driver, I see the same guy that 3 or 4 times I saw that man go, it's the same driver, and he works hard. That guy's amazing. What is his name?
Erwin Bissara.
Yeah. Kudos to him, because he cracks his okole. Per capita statewide, as it relates to poundage, is it similar across all counties?
Kauai is, I think, second to Maui. Used to be the top. Get the most food out per capita. Kauai. I think Maui overtook during the fire. But
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
And
Kauai
then,
does a great job.
I know you touched on it in the presentation, but the multiplier effect for money donations is 5-point-something% or times. Can you explain how that works for our viewers so that they understand that, you know, if they're giving $1, it's worth $5 and change worth of food? Can you
Sure.
explain that and how that works?
So we purchase oftentimes at the container level, right? So we're actually buying through our relationships with Feeding America on the continent. So we can buy a whole container of peanut butter or whatever, the onions. And then actually Matson and Pasha assist with the overseas transportation. So that's been a huge benefit to us. We don't have to pay for the overseas transportation. We have to pay to get it to the West Coast and on a Matson ship, and then we pay to pick it up. Matson's also allowed us to do what's called SIT, stop in transit, so that we can actually drop food off on Oahu and then bring it straight to Kauai. So and Young Brothers, again, has also helped to provide support for transportation from Oahu to Kauai. So I would say we're very fortunate that we have these very strong partners in the corporate sector that are making this all possible. But so we can purchase food, sometimes, chicken. I'll give you a few recent examples. We can get frozen chicken for 67 cents a pound. You might get apples for 8 cents a pound. I mean, just like quite inexpensive, especially the produce that we get through our partnerships might be B-grade product, but it's still great. So it might be like a little bit too big. I remember the first time we got these potatoes from Idaho, and they were like this big. I never saw such big potatoes. Or we got apples that are a little bit too small. So they can't sell them at retail prices, and they partner with the food bank. So we have these channels to get food that obviously none of us would have access to at the retail level. And because some of our costs are covered with our partnerships, we're able to get that just again at very, very low cost.
Okay, so simply you're getting it at a much lower cost.
Yes, yes.
And then last question, because you brought up the Matson, Pasha, Young Brothers. So this recent increase, 27 whatever % from Young Brothers, not going to impact the food bank here on Kauai?
No, because we are.
They're donating that.
Yes.
Really?
Yes,
Well, the
we
public
donate
should know
two,
that.
right? 2 shipments a month.
Wow.
Yeah, we're very lucky.
Well, mahalo to them for doing that. Awesome. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councilmember Bulasan?
Yes, thank you so much for the report, and thank you so much for the report and coming back. It's always helpful to make better decisions when we get good data, and your guys' dedication to getting good data is part of the reasons why I think from my perspective, we're helping more people. And this is one of the difficult conversations, and this is hard to have during this time of year. But when you shared and the data showing that you're serving more people than the pandemic, I think people might hear that and be very confused. Because during the pandemic, people were out of work or not in work, and the whole world was stopped. And so in my mind, I'm asking, why are we serving more people when we have more people working and they have jobs and they have transportation, and you hear the old rhetoric of, well, get a better job or go get a better car, but the data is not showing that. Everyone's working, everyone's doing their due diligence to be good citizens and good people and taking care of their families, but they need more help. How does the data picture that? I mean,
Sure. So I think probably the biggest driver is affordability. And if you look just at the cost of food, groceries, food at home has gone up more than 30% since prior to the pandemic. So if you follow the CPI, you can go look and see food has gone up more than 30%. And, I think all of us probably recognize that. You've all had sticker shock at the grocery store. But for our, you think about our food insecure families, working families, our Alice families, right? Folks who are working, but maybe just one paycheck away, one paycheck away from disaster. So your car breaks down, you can't get to work. All of a sudden, you're unable to pay for food. And when we did a study last year, we really were trying to understand why are the numbers so high, but it was jiving with everything that we're seeing. You know, I think for a family who's right on the edge, the food prices going up 30% in 5 years, that is a disaster. Your paycheck didn't go up 30%. Your rent didn't go down 30%, right? Again,
It might have doubled.
yeah. So all of these pieces are just making it harder and harder. And as I've said earlier, food is the one thing that people can see is like a little bit elastic in your budget, because you can't just pay 70% of your rent. You can't just pay part of your utilities, but you can spend less on food and you can go without food. And that's what we're seeing. Folks that are coming, you know, the new people that are showing up in distribution lines for the first time, lots of these are people who have never had to ask for help before, and they are working, and sometimes they're working 2 jobs or even 3 jobs, and they just can't make ends meet. So I do think it's a bigger issue, right? We can't necessarily solve it with food alone, but this is also really a crisis, right? And we think about emergency, you know, how we provide food for folks in emergencies and disaster. Well, not being able to eat, that is an emergency. So we have 32% of our families that are experiencing that at some point during the year. So I guess our perspective at the food bank is this is something that we can address. We can address it, and we have the relationships and networks in place to get food to our most vulnerable every day. And we need to do better, and we're always working to see how can we do better? How do we reach those people that we're not reaching today? But if, you know, I guess our belief is if we could just take this one issue off of people's plates, right? Think of how stressful it is to not know if you can feed your kids, to not know what you're going to do tomorrow. Okay, well, maybe I can make it work tonight, but what about breakfast? Okay, I'm just not going to eat. And we hear that over and over. Parents are just like, it's not even, they don't even think it's anything unusual. Of course I'm not going to eat dinner tonight because I got to make sure my kids have enough. And then you see that coming out in the rates of anxiety and depression and the other medical outcomes. So, you know, I really feel like if we can work together and make sure everybody just has access to food, we can work on these other long-term issues, right? There are so many reasons why we're in the place that we are today. But if we can just make sure everybody has access to safe and healthy food, everything else to me becomes something that we can work on without the kind of just critical need that we see right now in terms of food.
Vice Chair Cooley.
Yeah. I might have missed it when you were talking about federal cuts, but I'm thinking the obvious is if you have more funding, you can feed more people. So when the feds are cutting funding to food banks, I mean, which is kind of crazy, how are you filling that gap, or are you now having to feed less people?
So we were very fortunate that the state really stepped up this year. So during the shutdown, the state provided $2 million of support to the food banks across the state so that we could purchase food. And then we were quite fortunate to be a recipient of Act 310 funding that was specifically meant to help offset the costs of the reduced federal dollars and federal food. So we believe we can continue to serve the same number of people. I will say also, just like we are very good at stretching a dollar, food banks also very creative at figuring out, okay, how can we do more? And so we've been continually able to improve our efficiencies to get more food out and find new sources of food. So I think earlier this year we were very, very worried that we would not be able to continue to meet the need and might need to make changes. I think at the point we are right now, we're looking to see what will we be able to do now that the Act 310 funding came in and we can replace some of the cuts from the feds. That being said, with the increasing cuts to SNAP, with the Medicaid cuts coming down the line, the need is going to continue to grow.
So you had a slide too about this purchasing power and how, you get these donations and then 5 times, whatever. But you didn't show us anything about the donations. So, I mean, how has it been? Are people supporting at a flat level? Is it, as the need is increasing, are people donating more? Because obviously, and you didn't do it in your presentation, but I think at the end of every presentation, you should tell people how to donate and volunteer, right?
Yeah.
Because you need volunteers as well.
So we do, we rely so much, our volunteers, we couldn't do what we do without our volunteers. And we saw during the shutdown, so many people come out to help, to volunteer, to donate. I think we had as many food drives running across our service area in just that 1 month that we usually have all year long. So people really did step up. That being said, overall, if we take a step back, donations were down. So I think we'll need to we're still kind of getting all the information in about all the drives and the retail, the individual donors and food drives, but our retail, wholesale partners, those donations are down. Usually donated food's about half of all the food we distribute. About 30% is purchased and 20% comes from the USDA. So the USDA has gone down because of the cuts I mentioned, it's down to about 15%. And then our purchased foods now more than half of all the food that we distribute and donated has gone down significantly. So again, I think it could be, much of our food comes from retail partners, and as our retail partners are needing, everyone is needing to kind of watch their margins, we start to see people instead of donating that food, they might discount it and maybe discount it to a point that then they can't donate it anymore. So, and I think the last thing is that food's getting more expensive for everybody. Sure. So all of those things kind of taken together, we have seen donated food going down.
When I was thinking about donations, I was just thinking about dollars.
Oh.
So dollars and individuals. But that's interesting
Yeah.
too about how, because that's bottom line, it's affecting you. If you're getting less from retailers, then you have less to pass out to the people that need it. But as far as like the dollars, because we have a lot of people on this island that are doing very well too. And like United Way or the Charity Walk, they do these competitive things, right? So if you share all the information about kind of like who's giving what, then maybe others will try to match them and maybe give more. But I think as the need gets greater, we need to ask for more too.
Yeah, I think, again, prior to the shutdown, we were seeing, and this is something kind of happening across the country, philanthropic donations were starting to decline. Again, everyone's kind of tightening their belts. People were quite generous during the shutdown, and so we, again, are still working to see, it allowed us to really step up our response during the shutdown, but we're not sure if that means people just gave early. Oftentimes, December is our biggest time of the year for giving because people tend to make their gifts at the end of the year. So we're not sure right now if people just made their gift early, which was wonderful, but might not help us come January.
I have a few questions. Well, when we're talking about that, you are having an event on the 19th, right, that I'm planning on attending?
We are.
So can you tell people if they can learn more information or if that's a way if people choose to come to your event, I believe, right? Capena's so just tell us for a moment about that.
Wes, can you give us it's on the 19th, but Wes has all the good details.
Yeah, so this is the first time that we're doing a gala, right? We felt that it was time. We didn't expect the federal shutdown to happen at the same time or right before. So, like, I'll be happy to report our event will be a good event, you know. A lot of support from the community. Our title sponsor is Chan and Zuckerberg, so we're very pleased with that. December 19th, from 5 to 9, I think, at the Royal Sonesta. Capena will be playing. Whoever attends will get to see some of what we talked about today in the study and some of the stories of people on Kauai and what hunger means to them, and a little bit about what our team does to address hunger on Kauai.
It might be an opportunity for volunteer recruitment as well, right?
Absolutely.
And then what is your web address in case people want to donate now or donate like even just $25 a month, sometimes reoccurring donations? What is your website?
It's kauai.hawaii.org.
Okay.
HawaiiFoodBank.org. Sorry.
Foodbank.org. Okay, and then for many of us who have enough, but they don't have extra, I mean, that's the thing, like I'm sure many people who are watching this, and I'm so thankful, again, Councilmember Bulasan, that this is, goes across Hōʻike, and Hōʻike is such an amazing vector to get information out. People might want to give or help in some way. I know that another player in there might be, outreach to high neighborhood food production. I know when I planted my garden, I have like a little food forest. A lot of it goes over the edge. I did have a picker on the outside of the fence, so somebody took it away, but it was managed to be there for a number of years. I let people pick. Any of the food on the outside is for everybody. Do you work with, or is there a vector of people are listening that have abundance of neighborhood food production? Like I have so much, I couldn't even begin to think to eat it all. Is there an outreach if people are watching that they go, wow, I've got 4 avocado trees in my yard, but they don't have the energy to go pick it. I know Malama Kauai has a little bit of gleaning, but neighborhoods can come and people can pick, right? Do you have any kind of outreach that way? Is there somebody that you work with that we could recommend that people are listening? Malama Kauai might be one, right? It's called Village Harvest. Do you know of any others?
I believe Church of the Pacific has a little
harvest group,
gleaning group, a team that does gleaning. But just so everyone knows, there are a number of folks that just have backyard gardens and fruit trees, and they regularly donate to the food bank.
Yeah, because you can get paid for it, and I give food away all the time. I'm happy to do it. I have a couple other questions. So Wes, you and I have talked about this before. I found it very powerful to see here that about how much young food insecurity. I'm not surprised, but I have never seen numbers before that you have 53% of the 18 to 29-year-olds and 39% of the 30 to 40-year-olds, because we're always helping, we say keiki and kapuna, and I really like that you emphasize dads, because men are usually left out of the equation. Something that you and I have talked about before is almost like a regional choice pantry. So it's like a little store, so people can go in, because I think one of the reasons younger people, they're busy working. So to go, okay, at 2 o'clock on Thursday, I can go get some food. If you have a job, you can't go do that. So it seems to me that would be a good business model, because you wouldn't have to cart food around. Do we have adult food choice pantries that we can look to place, and maybe people would have like a little brown card or something like that would just show somehow they qualify? Have we worked more on that? Or
we do,
that?
We do, but it's usually tied to a specific date time. It's not open all week long like you're suggesting.
That's what I'm suggesting.
Yeah.
I'm looking for a location that people know they can stop by and get something.
Right. With your help, we can do that.
Okay, well, I'm happy to brainstorm that with you and work with different, there's all kinds of shopping centers that have
Yeah.
an open area. And then, I had, I'm gonna do a little other announcement. Food drive this Saturday at the Kilauea Kalikimaka event in the afternoon. So a lot of events, have their entrance is food. I think the elephant in the room, to me, is what would happen if the Hawaii Food Bank, I want to also acknowledge the Kauai Independent Food Bank, very important also, but if between the two and you guys have the high volume, is there any kind of safety net if something happened to you guys?
I think we're not the only one in this space, right? So some of our partner agencies work with us in feeding, but they also have their own thing going on, such as Malama Kauai, right? So I think that they have their own business model that suggests that there are planning ways to feed folks in case, one of the food banks disappears.
It looks like you guys are the volume. You guys are a
Absolutely.
very strong safety net. So I guess I'm just trying to let people know it's like we're in the Great Depression. When you see this amount of people who are in the breadlines of the Great Depression, and when it is our makua, our working adult population, that's like as you're saying, it's a crisis, it's an emergency, and this isn't just a feel-good nonprofit. And so I guess I'm doing a little bit of a closing comment. So anybody else have questions? Councilmember Bullason?
So what does 2026 look like?
Well, and first I do want to say we're not going anywhere.
Okay.
So
but
we
I
are-
mean, this is,
Yeah.
I just think this
Yeah.
is, the elephant in the room is how much dependency is out there that might be invisible to people who wouldn't normally watch this. And I'm hoping the press does something on this, because we always are hearing kupuna and keiki, but we don't hear this main age range.
Yeah.
This is the belly of our economy.
Yeah.
Is going hungry and not eating at night.
Yep.
So that is a crisis, as you were saying. So I want to make sure that people really grasp that. And without this vector of support that might be off people's radar if they aren't hungry, the third that's maybe really fine, they might not know.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think food insecurity can be kind of invisible, and I think the fact that we are starting to see more and more people say, hey, I've hit my limit, I just need help. And we've done a lot to work to try to make that experience for people dignified and they can get healthy foods. And so I think that maybe people that had in their head, oh, this isn't for me, can see like, oh, it's okay. It's okay to ask for help. So that's a big piece of what we're trying to do. We are very proud of our network and our partner agencies that are doing the hard work of getting food into community, and we work with just about everybody. So just about every organization that's putting food into community probably got their food from one of the food banks. So we might not be at the super visible, but I think we are there. We are working, and as we look ahead to 2026, I think we are anticipating the need continuing to go up. And we are going to need to partner with local government. I mean, I think in the long term, if we can work together, and it's not just the charitable sector or just government, we can really come together to say what it will take. Then you're not, overly relying on the charitable sector to make sure people get enough to eat. I mean, I don't think that makes sense in the long term. This really needs to be something that we do together. And then the last piece that we are working on is even even though we are facing major federal cuts to these food programs, there are still some gaps, right? So we started a SNAP outreach program and are able to get people signed up for SNAP, even though, you know, maybe it's getting more difficult or people's benefits still aren't as much. It's still a really important program, and every person that we get signed up for SNAP, hey, that's someone that now is getting access to food that didn't have to come through our warehouse and doesn't have to get counted in the 2 million pounds of food. So we're really looking at that. I think another thing that we learned from the shutdown, if you kind of look across at the programs, as SNAP was paused, but the child nutrition programs were not. So the USDA continued to fund this child nutrition program, such as school lunch and school breakfast. So we're thinking, okay, this could be another place. Let's partner with DOE to see how we can get more kids in school breakfast. Again, another place the state did, I'm sure you guys saw last year, right? In the legislative session, they increased the access to school breakfast and lunch. So this year, all the children that previously were only eligible for a reduced school lunch are getting free school lunch. And next year, everybody who is at 300% or below of the federal poverty level, our ALICE families, all those kids will get free meals at school. So that's huge, right? So again, I think there's different ways that we can kind of come together and make sure that people are getting food in these different spaces. But again, not something that we can do on our own.
Let's follow up to that question. What programs are you supporting on the county side? I know the food bank helps several of our programs, just so we know looking to next year. Because you mentioned a better partnership will help solve these problems, or at least address these problems.
Ask Wes to answer.
So we work with Office of Elderly Affairs, Kupuna box program. So it's a variety of produce. We have some local protein in there, a couple canned goods. This program has been going for years. There's a little bit of funding that comes from the county. We wish it would increase, but so we could expand to more kupuna. This one is driven by RSVP, the volunteers. They do the last leg, the hardest part that we have trouble doing, right, is the home delivery. Yeah, it would be awesome if we could expand that program. We also support the summer fund programs during the summer, provide them snacks and whatever they need. And we look forward to collaborating with them again. It's kind of like up to them what they want, right? So if it eventually turns into maybe a meal program where the county would provide meals to the kids, we could help with that too. So that's how we support the county.
Thank you.
I would just suggest you put in a request with, you know, what it would take to create this result. If we want to serve X amount of kids or X amount of kupuna, this is what we would need. And the timing is perfect because the budget session is coming up. So that was a nice way of inviting and then asking.
And then it might also be that if you have money that can go to the kids, that there might be some that can feed our starving young adults that are trying to educate themselves. Okay, any more questions? So I'd like to know if there's any public testimony. We've had quite a number of people in the room. Okay, so if you guys can wait on the, I'd like to start with Nelson Mukai.
Hi guys. Hello. My name is Nelson Mukai, and I think when sugar went down, we had all this extra land in Hawaii, and we didn't make use of it. And I just came back from Israel last night, and I saw the way they use their land. All their flat lands are used with these massive olive groves, date groves, all kind of fruits and vegetables, mangoes, bananas, and on these buffet lines, there's tons of food, like mountains of food, you know. They don't have any food problem, and you don't see obese people, you don't see skinny people. They're all, you know, well-to-do, you know, but they've been in war all this time, but they do fine, you know. They rely on their agriculture. So if we can be more reliant on our agriculture, our land, we are the garden island. We should be, you know, plant gardens. You know, we got to do that because why not use our land? I mean, we got water. They don't even have too much water, you know. But on their plants they have these canvases that they cover the plants with. Maybe we got to hire somebody from Israel to give us ideas on how to grow, be farmers, you know. And you know, my dad was a farmer. He grew all kinds of produce, you know, and he had mangoes, avocados, bananas, breadfruit, all kind of vegetables, dragon fruit. They all grow well on Kauai. If we can just grow our produce, hey, we don't need farmer market. We can just go to the food bank, you know, and hey, we can be self-sustaining, you know, sustainable agriculture, and you know, we can do it. We work together as a team. We need farmers. Everybody needs a job. Hey, you can be a farmer. You know, agriculture. You know, make money. We can sustain ourselves. We can do it. Think positive. Don't worry too much about statistics. We don't clog our minds with statistics. Just work together, make farms. Hey, use the land. We got tons of land on Kauai. You know, we can build houses. We can do anything. Well, we just got to think positive. Yeah, I guess my time's running out, but okay. Anyway,
Thank
that's
you.
my testimony.
Would anyone else like to testify? Do we have anybody online? No. Please. And state your name.
My name's Angel O'Brien. I actually don't live on Kauai anymore,
Okay.
but I was born and raised here. And back to visit my family. Fern is my sister. I remember when I was in 4th grade, I went to Elieli Elementary School, and we had a garden at the school, and we took care of it. And I've seen in other places where, you know, in elementary school, even up through high school, that there's gardening programs where kids learn about growing their own food. And in some places, even the kids grow all of the food that they then eat at lunch. And that is a great way for kids to learn about growing their own food and nutrition and all of that. And then I live in Portland, and one of the organizations we have there is they work with homeowners that have fruit trees and gardens that they don't use enough of, kind of like you, Felicia, and they organize volunteers to come in and pick all of the excess. And then half of what's picked goes to food banks or other organizations, and then half of it gets split up between the volunteers. So that is appealing to people who are, you know, qualify as being food insecure themselves, but then also other people that, you know, just want to volunteer. And then the other thing that I wanted to bring up is there a way to like tax or fine the big companies that are, you know, employing people full time, but not paying them enough to where they can feed their families? I mean, it just blows my mind that there's places like Walmart that, you know, make billions and billions of dollars a year in profits, and their employees are on welfare and Medicaid because they don't have enough money. And, you know, then it falls back on, you know, the smaller organizations and the smaller governments to then support their people, and that just seems not fair at all to me. So anyway, thank you very much.
Right. Yes, you can come as a member of the public. You want to? Oh, no, you're coming back up. Okay. All right. Okay. Would you guys like to come back for a moment and have a final space? And then you can stay there and we will have our closing conversation.
So I just actually wanted to mention one thing since we're talking about farming. One of the things that other counties are looking at right now are a farm-to-family program. The state put together a $500,000 a year farm-to-family fund for the whole state, which is, well, it would support us for about a week of our local food purchase. But Maui County, for instance, is doing $1 million this year for farm-to-family, and the farm-to-family program is, I think, something that's really worth looking into, because every dollar both invests in local agriculture, so helps your local farmers, and we can make sure that food goes to someone that needs it. So we're getting good, fresh, healthy, local food to our food insecure community. So I did want to put that out there, that is something that other counties are looking at, and could be something that could both, again, help invest in local agriculture, make us a more resilient and self-sustaining island, and make sure that we're addressing the immediate food insecurity needs as well. And then the last piece I just wanted to mention in terms of how the county might support the food bank is we are pretty stretched from an infrastructure and a staffing perspective. So we have grown and done more and more in terms of the volume of food. We really haven't done a lot in terms of adding staff. We've added a little bit of staff. We are packed to the gills in our warehouse. We do know that we need to move, so we are planning on what that might look like so that we can have a bigger facility, that we can do more. We can do more food rescue. We can have more, volunteers actually coming to the warehouse and helping to pack boxes. Those are things that we just can't do right now. We pack actually all of the school pantry bags, get packed on Oahu and shipped over because there's no place to pack it here on Kauai. And some of the ideas, like having a full choice pantry, we would love to do that, but we need space and we need staff. In fact, I think Wes has been driving the truck because we're just quite strapped. And to be able to staff our mobile pantry, we initially thought we could do it with one person. It really takes probably two to do it well. So as we think about upcoming work, I think that is one thing that we are really looking for, is some means of knowing we have regular support that we can count on, so that we can, not just for food purchase, but to support our operations so that we can do more.
Okay, thank you.
So Wes, when are you driving the truck next? I want to be watching now.
I drove it yesterday.
Thank you. Thank you all.
Thank you so much for having us. We really appreciate this opportunity.
So, any final discussion?
Just thank you so much. Your work is so important, and however we can support you. I'm going to figure out personally how I can do more myself.
Thank you so much.
You can drive the truck too.
I'll climb curbs.
Councilmember Bulasan?
Yeah, I just wanted to, again, mahalo to the food bank and everyone that associates and work with the food bank, all the partner agencies, all the volunteers, all the donors, and then all the unseen things that happen over time that make it all possible. When I first moved back home in 2014, this was one area that I didn't realize was important to me until I got memories when I moved back into my grandma's house. And the memories was, as an elementary student, going with my grandma to the food bank to get food because we couldn't afford food. And I didn't realize how much that impacted me over my life until coming back home and seeing the same need and that need grow, and then several challenges to our community happen and that grow even more. And so, the recent memory is, in November, just a month ago, with my son down the street on Crest Street, helping our community at a a food event, food giveaway event. I'm just holding my son, and I just realized, wow, it's full circle. And not a circle that you want to have full. Like, you don't want to be in a food line with your son again. So it's a different feeling, but then seeing what was the most challenging was family and friends that are fully employed, hard-working people, same age as me, and in that line. You know, and so this is one where, like, I want to make sure that this is constantly in front of us, and so I thank the council for allowing me to put this as a briefing and allow us to get the data, get the understanding, and then know what next steps we got to do to address this challenge, and then support those who are on the front lines. As we know, we all can't be everywhere, but we know we can be everywhere as a community. And so the more that we can come together and support, I really hope that next year we can turn the tide, even though it seemed as if it's going to be another year of increase, of more help, of more need, and more challenges. Somehow we always figure it out here on Kauai. And I think it's built into our DNA, and it's built into how our community functions. I'd like to end that circle in my lifetime, if not sooner. And so I know this organization and the many people who support is aiming for that. And so I'm happy to help in any way possible. Thank you guys for everything you guys do.
Council Chair Raposo?
Thank you, and again, thank you for being here. You know, I don't know how anybody, any leader, any elected official, any employee of the state can say or deny the fact that these numbers are unacceptable in our state. It just is. I mean, when you look at the percentages, and we all know families that are struggling, and I think to what Mr. Bulasan said, when that van was parked out here, your pantry was parked out here not long ago, I went out to just go take some pictures and put them on social media, and I saw some friends that, like Addison said, fully employed, young moms, my daughter's classmates, and, you know, I think they were, when they saw me come up and say hello, they were uncomfortable. And I know these girls so well that for them to be in that line in a broad daylight in front of the county building, the need was real. And it's hard to see. So I don't know how anyone can look at these numbers and say, well, that's just how. It's not how. And I think the state needs to step up, and they have. You know, you said thank you for them for well, rightfully so. I mean, it's not like you know, thank you for doing your job. That's your job. That's our job too. And that's why I say, you know, we need to know what the needs are so we can help as best we can as a county. But the state's got to put up the brunt of the support on these social services. But looking at this study, and ward researches are real. They're real. And we went in discussion about how they do these polls or these studies when we had the Department of Health here, and we had some questions about, hey, are you really getting to the right people? There were pockets on these islands that weren't covered. But, you know, I rely on their expertise. They're great. They're one of the best. So they adjust these numbers and they tweak it to make it as most representative as possible. So again, I'm not going to dispute the numbers, but there could be a possibility that numbers are even worse, or it could be better. But I think I think all of our knowledge and our intermingling with our community, I wouldn't suspect that it's better. So there's a lot of work to do, and we know, you talked about it, it's not going to get better as far as the assistance we're receiving and the funding that we're getting in the near future. So we must be prepared. Like we prepare for a hurricane or a tsunami, we got to be prepared for this. And the state did a great job when they backfilled their budget with all these emergency funds for nonprofits. And, you know, our county is going to have to do the same. And I think Derek did that in the last budget as well. So thank you guys for what you do. And, you know, whatever we can do to help, you know, we obviously are very willing to do so. So thank you.
Anyone else? Okay, Councilmember Carvalho? Okay.
Just wanted to say thank you. Appreciate it's about community and collaboration, cooperation, and just making sure we secure the resources and whatever support you folks need in general. I think that's a big part there. But just the information today is really, really well deserved, delivered. So thank you so much.
Councilmember Kaneshiro?
I'll just say thank you, and again, Wes, just share with us, the specific Kauai information that we can help you. Obviously, all the islands have their own differences on where they can benefit the community. You let us know specific, what we can do to benefit Kauai. As it goes as a fish in the pond, we are the smallest, though, the county. The feds are the hugest. They're the ones making the biggest cuts. State is next, and thank goodness the state's been stepping up, and we're like the small fish in the pond. I know Maui gave $1 million. Their budget, I think, might be 3 or 4 times bigger than ours too. But that's not to say that we're not willing to help, and just give us information on where you guys need the help. I really like the the school breakfast program where they looked at it and analyzed it, and with the numbers they realized that we're not doing what we're trying to do. We're not hitting the kids that we're trying to hit. And coming up with the school breakfast during their first recess, I think, was a brilliant idea, whoever thought of it. And, I just appreciate the way that everyone's looking at it, As Wes said, you got to be very specific on how we're not just, come here and grab food from our pantry. It's a lot more specific and strategic on how you get food out to the public. So just keep up the good work. I know, during COVID, food security was a huge thing. And as soon as COVID was done, no one said anything about food security, but I feel like the need was still there. So, I would love to see programs like this continue, or, programs that are providing grants to the food bank or to farmers to provide boxes to continue. So just thank you and keep up the good work. I've helped at some of the giveaways, and I actually got stuck in traffic at one of them, the KCC one. My daughter had tennis, and I think the line was probably past the stoplight. I had to call Wes. I was like, hey, you guys better try and open up the gate by Kilohana because there's a huge traffic jam over here. But it just shows, we know the need is there, and, people shouldn't be ashamed to go and use the services, because anybody that goes to the store knows how expensive everything is here. You go to buy milk, it's expensive. You buy eggs, it's expensive. Everything you buy is expensive. So there's no shame in getting assistance. And I just appreciate the services you guys provide, and keep up the good work.
I'll just echo the gratitude. Everything's been said, but you guys do so much for our community, and I'm so thankful for you. And if there's anything that we can do, like has been said, the only other thing I'm thinking that we could do is support your priorities for legislative session. So, citing a resolution from the council in support of whatever you guys deem priority is something that I would be really interested in doing, and just anything that we can do, obviously. And now I want to come volunteer.
And I echo all the gratitude that they have expressed, and especially even just for the presentation and the food insecurity. We hear it, but having an hour and a half conversation on it, really drives it home. And there's a lot of nuances that were especially helpful for me. And I'm hoping when people are watching this and seeing these numbers that it helps to reduce the shame. I was a child who grew up afraid to ever even show anybody my lunch ticket because it was the color of the poor people. And I'd feel a little bit bad to my mom, but I would never stand with her in line at the grocery store because I didn't want to see that. Then food stamps are like little paper things that would have to come out, but I was just like, couldn't quite cope with that. And so I get that foundation that makes people not want to come. So people are listening. It's happening to everybody, and this is bigger than the state or the county or our local economy. I say this many times on the floor. So much money, trillions of dollars have gone into our money supply. That's inflation that is pressuring. It's not that people are losers. It's that we have an economic game of musical chairs going on. So don't be shamed when you're hungry. I want to just acknowledge Nelson, and I'm glad you had a good trip to Israel and were able to share a comparison. I have been there before also. They have a little bit different economic structure, and they have different national priorities. And so we are part of the United States, so we aren't totally resilient, Kauai kind. But true resilience does begin with neighborhood and local food production. I try and live it out when I wasn't doing this job, where I'm at banquets and everything else. I would say 50% of my food, you know, certainly whatever I eat at home, 50% is what I just grab as I'm walking in. I see, oh, that's ready, that's ready. So I have a true sense of food security, because I know if, you know, I ran out of money, I still got plenty. So that is very valuable. And when we talked about farm to family and the county and what we can do, I want to give a shout out to our county for our Kilauea Ag Park, about a block down the street from me. That is really very much county supported, because that's our land, the county land, and I believe we pay the water bill. And it is an excellent example where people can go and they can learn gardening, but they don't have to have their own plot. So they go and they work and they leave with a big, generous box of stuff to come home. I know a number of the food that comes off of our ag park ends up in these meal programs that goes out, and we've got our own eggs and meat and everything. I'd love to see that happening around the island. It is resilience of what we need. And just again, on the cost of food, like I tend to walk to my local market. Once in a while I'll go to the big box stores, but I want to have a store down the street from me. It won't be there if I don't go there. But I walk there, and so what I can carry is usually a bag or my backpack. It's generally $80 or more, just what I carry home. And then supplement with all my ulu and, you know, avo and mango or whatever, sour stuff. I got like 34 food producing trees in my little yard. So that's why I get nervous about our fire protection. Get rid of all those trees. I'm like, oh no, I'm not gonna be able to eat. But, so thank you again, and thank you, Addison, and for people just tuned in, this 19th, that's Saturday, is that right? Next Saturday? Friday, you can help the Kauai-Hawaii-Foodbank.org, and you could come and learn more and be a part of, did I have it wrong? No dash. Hawaii-Foodbank.org. You get a ticket, you can donate, you can do a lot of different things. We all want to help you. It's a Kako thing. Okay, so with that, all those supporting our motion to receive for the record, say aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay, and with that, the Public Safety and Human Services Committee is adjourned. And we'll be back at 11 o'clock.
Actually, I'd like to call the Finance and Economic Development Committee to order. Let the record reflect that all members are present. Clerk, can you please read the first item?
Minutes of the November 19, 2025 Finance and Economic Development Committee meeting.
Move to approve.
Second.
All those in favor, anyone in the audience wishing to testify on the minutes? Seeing none, any discussion from the members? If not, all those in favor of approval signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, motion carried. Chair, should I read our next item in and then recess, or just?
You can just recess now, and then we'll read it in when we take it up.
Okay, so at this time we'll recess our Finance and Economic Development Committee.
Okay, and I'll call the Committee of the Whole to order, and let the record reflect all members are present. We have only one item, the minutes of the November 19th, 2025 Committee of the Whole meeting. Can I get a motion?
Second.
Moved in seconded. Any discussion or public testimony? Seeing none, all in favor say aye.
Aye.
Motion carried. With that, we'll resume the Finance and Economic Development Committee at 11 a.m.
mild recession, followed by a weak recovery. But very mild as in the sense that it's not a big downturn. It's not like the COVID recession or the Great Recession. It's simply that it's met that threshold of being 2 quarters of decline, which is the sort of described as a technical recession, but it's a very small amount of decline. But it's also followed by a very slow, weak recovery as well. So it's essentially just that the Hawaii economy is down to flat over the next year. Oops. So, I start off just by giving this sort of overview of the Hawaii economy because it really tells us, explains why we look quite squarely at how the U.S. economy is doing, and increasingly the U.S. economy is important for understanding the Hawaii economy. This pie chart shows all the different sectors of the Hawaii economy as a whole. The wedges that are pulled out, those are the only sectors that grew in the last year, in 2024. The sectors that aren't pulled out, those ones were not growing. But the strongest combined sectors are tourism. Now, tourism pulls out actually bits and pieces from lots of these different wedges, not just the green-coloured ones, but predominantly the green-coloured ones, but also across some of the others too. And otherwise, we rely heavily on government, both federal and state government. But in particular, federal government is much higher than other states. Tourism can be hit by shocks like recessions and so on, whereas federal government tends to be usually a little more stable, especially in Hawaii with sort of military type spending. So that's what our economy specializes in, and small open economies are natural that you specialize in one thing. But the other thing is to look at tourism is that 78% of those visitors come from the US. Now in Kauai, that number is more like 90% or 95% even. Japanese visitors used to be around 11 or 12% before the pandemic, but they've only returned about half, 5 or 6%, since the pandemic. And Canadian visitors are now a bigger share of visitors than Japanese visitors. But again, both of those are very small on Kauai. I've got some more Kauai-specific numbers in a minute. Oh, sorry. Also pointing out here that tourism is 16% of our economy. That was in 2024. In 2023, that number is more like 20%, and that would be more normal, but it was down in 2024 because of post-Maui wildfires, that recovery still hasn't fully come back. But if you look specifically at Kauai, the number is 34% instead of 16%. And if you also include the indirect effects, this is the fact that people who work in a tourism type job also go and shop at a grocery store and consume other goods, and it facilitates that spending. If you include that too, then it becomes 42% of Kauai's economy. Right? So Kauai is heavily dependent on tourism, and particularly heavily dependent on American tourists, U.S. tourists. So to put this also into perspective, this chart is indexed to 100 pre-pandemic, right? So it's telling us the change in visitor numbers since the pandemic. And you can see there the story I described about Japan only recovering about half, but the big bounce has been primarily amongst American visitors, U.S. visitors, right? So not only are we dependent on U.S. visitors, but U.S. visitors have become an even larger share of Hawaii's tourism industry. With Japan falling back relative to pre-pandemic. This was also particularly strong in the sort of post-pandemic period. There was this revenge travel period where people hadn't been on vacation for 2 years, and revenge travel, that's the sort of nickname we've given it. But yeah, there was this big surge that they could come to Hawaii when they couldn't yet perhaps go to Thailand or some other place. They were more trusting of somewhere still in the U.S. But that has died away, and then also been particularly weak over the most recent summer. So, with being very dependent on the U.S. economy, we take a big look at how the U.S. economy is doing. And throughout 2024, the U.S. economy was pretty strong, and that kept Hawaii going. That's why we saw sort of stronger tourism numbers from US visitors during 2024. 2025 has been much weaker. But actually, since then, these numbers have been revised downwards. Now, 2024 is not quite as strong as it had appeared, but it's still fairly strong. But 2025 is much, much weaker than it was before. And in fact, we'll see in a chart soon that it's continuing to get weaker. One of the main things that's causing this weakness relates to tariffs, right? So tariffs since the start of 2024 have been up and down, and it changes every few weeks. Right now it's before the Supreme Court, and who knows where it goes after that. If the Supreme Court decides against that those particular set of tariffs are not allowed, then the effective tariff rate will drop quite a lot, but then there'll be also potentially other legal channels that they'll try to bring them back through. So it could be back up and again, right? So that then leads to all this uncertainty. So these are two different uncertainty indexes that measure. The blue line measures uncertainty based on what's in the news. Now you can see COVID was a pretty uncertain time, but as far as the tariffs were concerned, that was also basically just as uncertain on this news index as during COVID. The top line is a survey of small businesses and how they feel about investment and how much uncertainty they're facing in terms of their business and revenues and so on. And they're feeling as much uncertainty now as they were during the pandemic in light of these sort of tariffs, because when they import a product, they don't necessarily know how much duty they're going to have to pay for it, especially when the timelines are further down the track. But then also if they're looking at investment, you're thinking 2, 3, 5 years ahead. And that is an extremely uncertain right now as to what tariff rates are going to look like. So that then pulls back on investment. This is also weighing on consumers. Consumer sentiment has dipped throughout 2024. You can see it also dipped early in 21, 22 when inflation was peaking. And then it came back as inflation was coming down, right? So consumers are less positive than they were previously, and that also weighs on their willingness to then spend and take a Hawaii vacation or spend otherwise in the US. So with investment kind of slowing, the main thing that's kept investment going in the US, if you look at that last bar, so this breaks down the different types of investment that go on, the change in the types of investment, and the big change has been investment in AI-related capital expenditures. So this has been a lot of spend throughout the US on data centers and so on, gearing up for this AI revolution, but everything else is flat or down. And so that's been the main source of investment growth in the US. And without that, that investment growth would really have disappeared completely. I'm going fast because I have like 20-odd slides. If you have any questions, please pause me and I can answer those.
We'll take questions at the end, so just mark the page you have a question on. We can go back to it after.
I want to also get more to that. We spent a lot of time on the US here, but I want to get also to talking a bit more about Hawaii. So this is a chart of what inflation has been over the last year. Inflation was coming down from its higher previous peaks, but this is the orange line is a forecast of what inflation would have been without those tariffs, right? So tariffs have pushed inflation back up again a little bit, and all of that tariff has not yet completely passed through to consumer prices either. So you would expect then that inflation will remain higher or even go a little higher again over the next year or so. Okay, so tourism, this is now Hawaii specific. So these were visitor numbers visitor spending over the last 3 years. And no, this is Hawaii, Hawaii-wide. You'll see a dip there in September 2023, right during the Maui wildfires. I have a chart in a second that breaks this out by excluding Maui and the rest of the state. So after the Maui wildfires, there was a big drop in in visitor numbers, predominantly on Maui. Some of those visitors in the short aftermath of that came to Kauai instead. But that sort of substitution effect quickly wore off. So these are probably people that had a trip booked already that simply just moved their accommodation to Kauai. But other people who were perhaps considering a trip to Hawaii probably canceled rather than, or decided not to book the trip instead, rather than transfer that to Kauai. So you only see this short bounce on Kauai in the immediate aftermath of the wildfires. But over the most recent summer period, the numbers were as bad as after the Maui wildfires. Right? So the Maui wildfires, that dip is confined primarily to Maui, whereas this other weak summer point, that's spread across the state. So in any single place, it's not felt quite as badly as that would have been felt on Maui. But just to give you some perspective as to how weak the summer was in terms of tourism spending. There's a subsequent bounce, which is welcome news, but it doesn't pan out in sort of some of the other numbers, and so it's not quite clear that that's a sustainable bounce to continue. So we're expecting that weakness to continue in the coming year. Now, this is an update of an earlier chart that was in the Kauai Q2 report. So it's just comparing 2019 with 2024, and I've added in 2025 as to sort of the visitor shares from the different places, and you see here how much, okay, the colors appear wrong, but the gray bars are corresponding with the United States, being the largest share of visitors. For Japanese visitors, they primarily come to Honolulu, to Oahu, but there's only a sliver of Japanese visitors that come to Kauai. But you'll notice, if you look closely at that chart for Kauai, that share of international visitors from not just other international, Japan and Canada, has gotten much, much smaller than it was previously. Canadian visitors are also a bit weaker right now. They're down 9% from 2023, I think. So this was even when they were already down a little bit from the Maui wildfires. They're down another 10% because essentially the Canadian economy has been hit quite hard by tariffs. Their exports are really down. There are also a lot of anti-US sentiment. That means they're not visiting Florida, they're not visiting Nevada. And maybe Hawaii might be a little more insulated from that because we're seen a little bit less with that same brush as the rest of the US, but Canadian visitors are still down 10% in Hawaii. This is looking at visitor numbers by over time and our outlook for those visitor numbers. This is where I'm describing that we're expecting visitor numbers to remain weak. Here we've broken out Maui, but that trend on that top line is very similar across each of the other islands, so it's easier to just look at them all together. We've had this weak summer, we've had a slight bounce after the summer, but we're expecting some further declines in 2026 and then a recovery starting more in late 2026, but at a very sort of slow recovery, right? It's not getting back to the same levels that it was during that revenge travel period. And this is also particularly, Maui even sees declines despite the fact that it's already down a whole lot post-wildfire. So this is a chart of, it's going back to the US. This is non-farm payroll jobs for the US, but if you look at, this is for Hawaii, not US. Payroll jobs have essentially been flat for the last 6 months, and in fact slightly down in the last 6 months, and you can see that growth has all worn off, and that slowdown over, so it's fairly strong in the first quarter of the year, but that slowdown since then has been pretty abrupt in terms of job growth. Right? So the state has seen, on the back of the US having a slowdown, the states also had, and then the slowdown in tourism, the states also had a slowdown in job growth. If we look at each of the counties, you see this is again all indexed to 100, so you can compare it to pre-pandemic. and we can also compare the counties, because obviously there's a lot more jobs in Honolulu County than the other counties, but by indexing it all to 100, then we can sort of compare trends by county. Now, both Kauai and Maui were hit much harder by the pandemic, which is where it drops off the bottom of the chart there. And that's because of this real dependence on tourism. Right, and you'll see this weakness happening in late in the last few months on pretty much all of the islands except for Maui, which is seeing some recovery from the wildfires, but is still a lot weaker than it was in 2023. And overall, everywhere except the Big Island is down on the pre-pandemic level as well. So, in our forecast, we're forecasting a mild recession, which implies loss of about 2,000 jobs across the state. The largest drag, or the largest decline in those jobs, comes from the federal government, and then otherwise from the tourism sector, right? And so tourism's probably the more important factor on Kauai. And just because tourism is such a large part of the economy. The other thing to keep in mind with a recession is that for a lot of people, you may not notice that the economy is in a recession. If you are able to keep your job, then the difficulty might be that it becomes harder to, say, argue for a pay rise, or if you're trying to convince your manager that you want to hire somebody, that might become more difficult. But for most people, they get by. The thing that happens in a recession, it's the people who lose their job, or the people who are graduating into that recession. They're the ones who tend to feel the brunt of it. So the pain is not equally spread across everybody. For most people, it's steady as she goes. It's the people that are having to look for work at that time that really face the biggest struggles. So we have this forecast drop in jobs, but then we have a recovery starting in late 2026, and that recovery is also not particularly rapid, right? It's very flat. It's not that we're expecting jobs to come suddenly rushing back. So even though we're describing it as a mild recession, the effect of that mild recession will be felt for a little while because we have this kind of jobless recovery subsequently. Now inflation, so this chart plots both real GDP growth and inflation together. You'll see in 2026, real GDP growth drops to almost zero. So that's the drop at the start of the year due to a recession, and then some subsequent growth that it gets just barely positive in 2026. But inflation is still sitting there at around 3%, right? So you have this gap between real GDP is already adjusted for inflation, so it's not that inflation is outpacing GDP itself. It's that in sort of a normal state of affairs, you tend to have more GDP than you do inflation. Inflation tends to be pegged to this 2% target level by the Federal Reserve. The long run rate for GDP growth, typically for the US economy, is around 2.5 or 3%. But this situation with higher inflation than real GDP growth tends to persist in Hawaii, and that's because Hawaii has sort of a lower long-run real GDP growth compared to the U.S. overall, and this is in part related to the types of industries that we have. That tourism is not a particularly growing industry, and that generally dominates our economy. The other thing to think about, a question that I'm posing in some of understanding these longer-term trends. So the recession is a relatively short-term trend. Hawaii has a relatively low long-run growth rate. When we get this downturn in the U.S. economy, that then pulls Hawaii into this negative territory, and that means we enter a recession. So I want to understand the sort of long-term low growth rate and what can be done about that. And part of the problem with this long-term growth rate is it has created a gap between what you can afford in Hawaii and what people can afford on the continent, which is not just cost of living, but also their wages and their income. And so since For the last 25 years, 23 of those years have had out-migration, domestic out-migration from Hawaii. There's still been positive population growth until 2017 due to international migrants in general coming to the US, and some of those come to Hawaii. But there's been domestic out-migration, so more kama'aina or residents leaving Hawaii for the continent than new residents arriving from the continent. And that's in part driven by this gap. So the gap that I'm going to show you in a minute relates to this trend in tourism. So this is a chart of tourism spending going all the way back to 1964. Now, during the 60s, 70s, and 80s, tourism spending growth was really rapid, especially in the 80s. There was a lot of foreign investment from Japan at that time. But essentially since 1989, tourism spending has been flat down, and it only reached that 1989 point in that revenge travel period that I described earlier, post-pandemic, right? And so it's basically been flat for 35 years, and except for whenever you have one of these, events that really hurts tourism. Tourism is quite vulnerable to recessions or to a natural disaster like COVID or Hurricane Iniki or the Maui wildfires. You see the dip on the right. And so that flatness in tourism is really what's driven this sort of long-run growth rate. So tourism naturally flows through to what happens to GDP. So we did a study here, which will be released sometime in December or January, where we look at GDP per capita, but we adjust it also for cost of living. So we wanted to, if you look at GDP per capita before 1989, or actually right up until 2016 or so, Hawaii had higher GDP per capita than the rest of the US. But if we adjust for cost of living, then Hawaii has slightly less GDP per capita, essentially saying that this is the purchasing power of a dollar of value generated in Hawaii compared to this is the value of that one person creates in Hawaii compared to the value that they would get on the mainland in terms of what they can purchase with that value. Right, so the nominal value, the dollar value, is higher in Hawaii, but because of our higher cost of living, you get this gap. And so that creates this rhetoric or that catchphrase you hear about the, excuse me, the price of paradise, right? So that gap is the price that people pay for living in Hawaii. That's the opportunity cost of living in Hawaii compared to living on the mainland, and that was relatively stable and in fact closing before 1989 because Hawaii was growing faster than the US and was in fact had higher GDP than the rest of the US except for its cost of living, right? So that real purchasing power gap was narrowing. But since 1990, Hawaii went through this period of the lost decade and then growth started again in around 2000 and after the 2001 recession particularly, but it only just got back above its 1990 level by 2006. And keep in mind as well that we're talking here about per capita GDP, so it's not just growth for the sake of population growth, it's the amount of value generated per person. But what we also see is that didn't really change even after 2005. That same trend kind of continued in Hawaii, that it has this real growth rate of only 0.7% from 2005 onwards, while the US keeps growing. So that gap just keeps getting wider and wider and wider, right? So the price of paradise is not just about cost of living, it's also about the amount of value created per person, or which ultimately then determines how much the wages that people can earn in Hawaii, and that gap has been getting just wider and wider. And so that's been the real driver of that domestic out-migration. And as that gap continues to get wider, if that's a problem is not resolved, if we don't return to a higher growth rate or catch up, then that flow just keeps getting stronger, that more and more of your friends and family end up living on the mainland and because of that gap. And it's a very similar story also in New Zealand. So I'm reasonably, I'm not sure why that people move for higher wages somewhere else. And so whatever Hawaii can do to address that problem is helpful. But it's not just about cost of living. Like if you address cost of living, let's say we manage to reduce the cost of living by 10%, that closes that gap temporarily, but it doesn't change that kind of trend. So we could reduce cost of living in Hawaii in general by 10%, that gap would close by about half, but then that trajectory continues and the gap gets wider. And essentially it's addressing cost of living is kind of almost, it's just kicking the can down the road and not really solving the real problem, which I think is a much bigger problem, is that trend. Because Hawaii has always been expensive. When you go back to the 60s, it was more expensive, and that gap was pretty consistent and pretty sustained, and there wasn't as much outmigration. There wasn't outmigration like there is now. But the widening of that gap is what's driving more people to leave Hawaii than to return. So I'll finish on, and we'll have some questions. We can go back to any slide if you like. But this is just a clip of our website. If you want to look at all the different types of things that UHERO works on and it's a topic you're interested in, you can generally find something from one of my colleagues on many different topics. So.
Okay, thank you for that. Questions on the slides? Councilmember Caldwell, you look like you have some questions.
I'll maybe ask one or two and let others and then come back because I'm like, whoa, thank you. Thank you, it's important. You just said, because I think this is the thing that is the urgent issue when I'm looking at your slide before last where we see the widening gap and the outmigration, but you said cost of living isn't the real problem, but you didn't say what the real problem is. So what's the real problem?
So that trajectory is the reason that gap is getting wider and wider.
I understand that. What's causing the trajectory? Okay.
It's a combination of the types of industries that are growing in Hawaii versus what exists on the mainland, whether or not. And,
Okay.
Tourism hasn't had growth for 25 years. So essentially that tourism chart, the tourism spending chart, looks very similar. Looks very similar to that GDP per capita chart, because tourism spending naturally flows through to how much people earn in those tourism-related jobs.
So we could compare that to where you saw AI as a huge economic driver in the continental United States. We don't have that here. So the fact that, for example, that we don't have AI is part of those are higher paying jobs that people might go to, although maybe they're robots or they're bots or.
Well, AI does both replaces some jobs and creates new ones. So it's, for the most part, the surveys on this are tending towards changing people's jobs. So most people don't feel that they're going to be replaced by AI just yet. AI is not that good, but what it does is it changes how you work. It changes how you can, say, you can read a 100-page document and get a pretty quick summary on it relatively quickly and have a good idea of everything in that by asking the AI to kind of summarize it for you. It's not that the AI digests it all for you and makes decisions for you. It's still real people doing those jobs at the end of the day, but the AI can help them to do those jobs more efficiently and more productively. That sort of benefit will still be happening here, and that type of productivity benefit, that could boost our outcomes beyond the sort of pessimistic outcome that we have now. That's sort of everywhere. The AI investment that I'm talking about, that is the data centers and so on, and the related AI companies that are running, these are not located in Hawaii. So those will have particularly high value, but AI is also a special kind of technology that's about diffusion of that technology into everybody's jobs and routines, and as that becomes more and more normalized in people's routines, that should be some boost to productivity, but it's not clear yet how much that will boost people's productivity.
So I have one more simple question, and then after that I've got slides, but after other people ask questions, my really simple question. I always see they separate out non-farm payroll. Why do they separate it out? And then what is farm payroll? I mean, is that ag? Is ag's in the list? I don't get why we call things non-farm payroll.
Yeah, I'm not specifically sure of the difference either. With the
We don't have sugar anymore, so.
Yeah, it's to do with how the jobs are registered and how the data is collected. That I guess they aren't collecting quite as much from rural areas. But it's also, keep in mind that agriculture is a much smaller share of the Hawaii economy than it used to be. So agriculture was very important to Hawaii in the 70s and 80s and so on. But that share has shrunk to be very low, around 1 or 2%. It's not a significant part of the Hawaii economy anymore.
But ag is still
Ag is particularly
included
important
in the chart that totals into non-farm payroll. So
Sure. Yeah, and that's also talking about ag, the value from ag as opposed to the number of jobs. So ag isn't a huge employer compared to other industries.
okay, I'll let other people ask questions. Then I have more
Any other questions from the members? Councilmember Bulasan.
Thank you so much for your presentation. So much to cover. I'm going to focus back to that same slide where you're sharing about there's no growth since the 80s for tourism. Yeah. That number is that adjusted inflation? So
Yeah. So that was a chart of real tourism spending adjusted for inflation. You often hear stories on the radio and so on that tourism's reaching new record levels, and also I think HTA's been saying how that we've got fewer visitors, but they're spending more, and we're reaching new records. But if you adjust for inflation, that trend basically disappears completely, and we haven't had any spending growth since 1989. Any real spending growth after inflation? Yeah, that's right.
I have a question. The job number is weakening across the state. You had the payroll job slide.
Yeah.
Hawaii County seemed like it jumped a little bit. I was curious what happened in Hawaii County.
I don't know. I don't know specifically what happened in Kauai. What we noticed with the Kauai data is it tends to bounce around a lot more. So simply because you have smaller numbers, when you have a business, say a business collapse, let's say, or you have a new business start, that can tend to be a lot more volatile. And so,
Hawaii County had a big bounce. Kauai and Oahu, Kauai and Honolulu kind of stayed the same.
Oh, in terms of the general jobs.
Yeah. Maui dipped because of the fires, and then it's slide 14.
I don't have it in front of me, but I remember the chart that they have more jobs than pre-pandemic.
Yeah, so I was just
this is actually, it's probably more to do what we're talking about there is there are flows between counties as well of people, right? So people move to the mainland, they move back to Hawaii. There are more people. There's generally been more population growth on Hawaii Island.
Yeah, we'll have to turn our mics back on, but it'll be slide 14.
This one?
Yeah.
Yeah. So Hawaii County had a stronger recovery from the pandemic than other places. Hawaii County also has, so even though it has quite a lot of tourism, it's not as specialized in tourism as Maui and Kauai are, and it has other industries that have generated some growth, more so than other counties. And then there's also a cost of living story that you can live for cheaper housing is a lot cheaper on the Big Island, at least outside of Kona, compared to, say, Kauai or Honolulu, and that creates a flow as well. So that flow of people that we see leaving the state and coming back, there's a larger share of those are going to, but it's not, the largest share is always going to Honolulu, but at the same time there's some out-migration from Honolulu to the Big Island for the same cost of living reason as people are going to the mainland.
Councilmember Cowden, your mic.
Can we please look at slide 13? Staff, can you move it to, you did it, okay. So see those two final bars right there where just so I want to make sure I'm understanding this. People are still holding on to their jobs, but the job growth is just gone.
Yeah, so the blue line is describing the number of jobs. That's on the left axis, so that's around 643,000 jobs. The gray bars are describing the change, the percentage change in jobs. So when that graph is sloping upwards, you've got these really high bars because it's increasing. And as that slope starts to go downwards, you get some negative bars. And those bars are spread out over 6 months. They basically smooth that growth rate because otherwise you get, all this volatility. To actually see what the trend is in job growth month to month, is better to look at the sort of 6 month or annual number. The problem is when we look at an annual number, we end up with this strong surge back in January or December where there was a fair bit of job growth, even though it's been flat ever since. So by looking at the 6 month, we can look at the trend over the last 6 months, which since January has been negative.
So when we look at, say, if you look above July 24 and you see that huge amount of job growth over different months, and that number is low, that job growth right there is what gave us the peak, maybe above January 25?
No, the other way around. So that big bar in July 24 is capturing all the growth since January 2024. So it's the slope since this,
okay.
Since then, whereas the peak in January 25 is capturing the previous 6 months.
So when we see that recent loss of growth, and then in fact less than growth, it's job loss. You didn't say why that is. Is that because of all these layoffs, or maybe the federal government?
So the federal government jobs aren't yet in this data. So a lot of that will have come through in September when those people. So even though they were laid off earlier than that, they were being paid until September, and so they're not actually counted in the job loss numbers until September. That weakness is essentially the slowdown in tourism that we've had over the last 6 months.
Okay. So
and so you will have had a very similar trend on Kauai because of the dominance of tourism as well.
So can we look at slide 17 that talks about inflation? I don't know if you were able to hear our earlier presentation, which was on our food insecurity. So 1 in 3 people here food insecure, huge amount in the young, what should be working population. So I see that inflationary pressure, as they've added money to the added to the money supply, has been a big problem with the inflation. But so when we see a big boost like in 2022, that's probably some of that extra workers' comp. So we're seeing the inflation go down here, but is that simply, does it accumulate, right? So the inflation that happens in 2022 that gives us an extra $300,000 on the cost of our house, it carries over, but then in 2023 we get another $100,000 on, carries over. 2024 we get $300,000 more and it carries over. Is that so? Like when we get to 2026, that's like a real oddball right there, because the gray, what does the gray represent there?
The gray, so both of these are describing growth rate. So it's the rate of change, and the orange bar's inflation is describing the rate of change in prices. So prices are still going up, but the Fed tends to target a inflation rate of around 2%. And it's generally better for the economy to have not have negative inflation, right? Deflation tends to crash an economy because when you get deflation, what happens is people stop spending completely, and the economy goes into kind of a death spiral.
Yes.
And it becomes worse.
But
so they keep some positive inflation in order to get there, but you want to keep it low and stable. And so by aiming for these sort of stable prices, that then allows the rest of the economy to just keep going and functioning. You had this big surge in inflation post-pandemic for a number of different reasons, primarily about, people got these extra checks from the to get them through the pandemic. And if we'd been asked pre-pandemic that the price of, getting through that period would be some post-pandemic inflation, people might have been all right with that. When it came along, they weren't okay with it, but...
I was calling it out while it was happening, and I knew what happened would happen, because you can't dump that much of false money into the economy and not inflate everything. So it felt intentional to me.
And it's the Federal Reserve's responsibility to manage that inflation as well, and so they should have raised rates earlier than they did. And they didn't because they attributed it to, which was one of the major causes as well, was the slowdown in the supply chain. That China had factories that were closed. There were all sorts of problems in shipping, and those sort of transitory effects they expected to disappear relatively quickly, and they didn't.
Yeah, right? And when they were saying transitory, I thought, well, that was hard to accept. Okay, if we look at number 18, slide 18, go ahead.
I'll just finish on this point about inflation. Inflation surged, but they did get it back under control, and it was heading down towards 2% and would have met its 2% target, except for the tariffs being added on. So the reason it goes back up again, that's the tariff part being felt until it then comes down to its sort of long-run growth rate again at 2%. GDP growth, this is how much value is produced across the entire Hawaii economy. That value is used to pay for everybody's salaries, returns on the investments that, you know, that pay for the buildings and tools that people use. But the fact that that growth is relatively low then creates this gap between what you can get, what you can earn in Hawaii, what you can make on an investment in Hawaii, and so that slows down investment. That slows down people. It encourages people to move to the continent.
Move to the continent, because that's I feel like that's our biggest issue, probably to all 7 of us, is that we're losing our population. And so something why I'm asking about the transitory, where I really disagreed with that, and what's happened is this is a macroeconomic force that is larger than the county can manage. It's really larger than the state can manage, but the outcome is that we're losing our people. So I think it's important. So if we look at slide 18 now.
Well, I think if we also hadn't had that protection of people's incomes during the pandemic, we would have also had a much greater outflow of people during the pandemic.
Sure.
Because Hawaii was hit so hard by the pandemic that, you know, there were so many people that lost their jobs, that income protection is what allowed them to actually stay through that period. We do have this general sort of long-term trend, but I think that's less related to inflation, more related to this sort of lack of long-term growth.
So that's the underscore of my concern, is I wouldn't have shut the place down so long, because that's the outcome of shutting it down. Okay, let's look at 18.
Which one is this?
You just had it.
This one? Okay.
Okay, so right there, I just want to grasp it for a moment. Our resident population is going up, but our domestic, like multi-generational population is going down. And so something I say, and I'm asking you for accuracy, I felt like the outcome of some of these last choices is we have more what I will call flown here than grown here. These lower bars is the grown here leaving, and the blue line is the flown here arriving. Do I have that accurately?
No, so the blue line represents the entire population.
Yes.
And so that, whereas the bars represent the change, the number of
people
leaving, the net number of people leaving. So the number of people arriving less the number of people leaving.
Yes.
And that is a negative number relative to the population, but from the continent. So the difference is, the reason for that growth pre-2016 is just general population growth from international migration.
Right.
So the difference between these bars is the international migration part. So it's not just flown here, but flown here internationally to become resident. But that more relates to general population growth for the whole U.S.
I use that kind of alliteration of 2 rhyming words because people remember rhymes better. But what I say is we have replaced our population, or we are replacing our population. So, and I will own that I wasn't born here, but what has happened because of these economic policies is we have pushed people away. All right, next slide.
Follow-up, Council Chair.
It's a clarification. That blue line is just the resident population of migration, not population of Kauai.
No, this is the resident population of the state.
Yeah.
Of the state.
Yeah.
It includes.
So the state has about 1.4 million people, but it hasn't had any growth in that population since 2017.
Okay.
But if you look at domestic migration, so these are people just moving to the continent versus moving from the continent to Hawaii, that's been negative since 2000, in 23 of the last 25 years.
So more people are leaving than coming.
More people are leaving than coming to the mainland. Since 2017, more people are leaving than coming in general. Before 2017, more people are coming than leaving, but the difference is that it's from those international migrants that are coming to the U.S. in general, and some of them settle in Hawaii.
Thank you.
Okay, I think my other questions are answered. I just, when you hear passion, it's difficult to watch all this stuff.
I like it when I have a passionate audience because they always ask very interesting questions.
Because I feel like national economic policies, coupled with maybe some of our local ones, has really hurt the continuity of our culture here.
Any other questions from the members? Do you have any good news for the future?
Well, I mean, the good news was the bit about AI. AI could potentially create some productivity bump across the country. The spending growth has stayed relatively strong, although a lot of that spending growth in the US has been amongst higher income households, largely because their 401k is doing pretty well, and that allows them to spend a little bit more. And if that spending translates to fewer tourists spending more money in Hawaii, that would be a potentially positive outcome. But it also, highlights the rising inequality and some other sort of issues. And you have this sort of, they've described it as kind of a K-shaped economy, that for most people, the economy feels bad. And for a handful of people that are really wealthy and doing, their stock investments have done well, the economy feels quite good. And so you have this sort of diverting trend.
I did have one more. Back to your mic. Back to your comment about the numbers adjusted to inflation. Because yesterday we had our the Kauai Visitor Bureau, the Hawaii Visitors Bureau briefing yesterday, and it was pretty bleak too. I mean, we had that was bleak, and food bank briefing was bleak, and this one is bleak, but the numbers that come out in that report from the Hawaii Visitors Bureau that they use on the revenues you're saying those are not adjusted with inflation?
I mean, I don't know what numbers they showed you. If you use the just nominal data, you can say Hawaii had record tourism spending in 2024 or whatever date it was, or even 2025 as having record spending. But if you adjust for inflation, that trend completely disappears.
Yes.
That was kind of the gist of my question. So, because the headlines are constantly saying that, but those numbers, have you run numbers on visitor spending? Has UHERO done studies on visitor spending that were adjusted to inflation?
I mean, so if you look at the UHERO's website, we have a data portal where you can explore all sorts of data about our economy.
Overwhelming, actually. You guys do a lot of stuff.
But just, if you spend some time there and get comfortable with it, you can find different things. So one of them is tourism spending, and you can find nominal tourism spending, which is just going up continuously, and you can find real tourism spending, which is adjusted for inflation, which is the chart that I showed you. And that gives you a better idea of value over time, because you can't compare $1 today to $1 in 2020 before we had that big inflation surge, right? There was 25% inflation, so in the nominal numbers, you're going to, cumulatively over that time, the nominal numbers, you're going to have a very high number just because of the cumulative inflation since 1989. But in the actual real terms, there's been virtually zero growth. There's been no growth since 1989. You hit the same peak in the revenge travel period, but that's declined again since then. And otherwise, you have these. The other thing I want to highlight with that chart is the vulnerability of tourism to each of these different shocks that come along, like a recession or a hurricane. And because so much of our economy, and especially on Kauai, is tied to tourism, and tourism is especially affected by these kinds of natural disasters. The next time there's a wildfire or a hurricane, Kauai is particularly vulnerable to those kinds of shocks.
I have a follow-up on that one, and it is on slide 10, where we see the Maui fire, where it dropped. Actually, there's another one in here. I'm looking at another one. When we had this gap on where we were looking at Kauai relative to the others, like in the 90s, I think for Kauai it was Hurricane Iniki. You called it a lost decade somewhere in here. And I wrote a note, I'll find it. But when we had that lost decade, I think Kauai, it was because our hurricane was so devastating. But I think maybe for...
I think it's slide 19 for us.
So I think maybe for the rest of the state, it was the economic collapse of Japan and Asia?
So it was a combination of a lot of different events. So there was the financial crisis in
Yeah,
in
the
Asia. Then in the late
Black
90s,
Monday.
earlier in the 90s, there was the collapse in Japanese asset prices, and that then essentially the big surge you see in the 80s was Japanese foreign investment coming here, and that essentially halted then after the investment bubble collapsed in Japan. But then you also had the end of the Cold War, so there was a big decline in the military presence. So that created some of that drag. You have, of course, Hurricane Iniki, and there's several different events that that were major hits to the Hawaii economy over.
I have an ask of you when you're doing it for the next time. Something I think is very important for us to look at is the economic stratification that's happening in the state. I don't think that's a surprise to anybody. Like if you were to look at our economy here, it's an inverse bell curve, right? We have more on the poor and more on wealth. But what I don't see, I usually see probably what's a reflection of N11 forms. That means in-state residents. And I think what would be very meaningful for especially the Kauai thoughts and how income tax and real property tax, how all these things are done, is that if there was also maybe a different colored line when you were to put like who has the money or what the economy is. So we have a lot of poor, maybe a little bit of the middle class, and we have some wealthy. But if you put it a yellow line where it was our part-time residents, I think it would look really different, that you would have, like a real steep incline on the right. So how the county tries to deal with that is we have sort of radical taxes, trying to get to the right side of it. But it hurts a lot of us that are here too, and for the state, that the schools and the social services, they don't get that part on the right side, where we're the high side, right? Where it's the part-time residents.
Yeah, so when people are resident less than 6 months, I think they can avoid income tax, right? So they have a holiday from here that they just spend 5 months of the year here, and they can avoid being tax resident.
So what we have is something that's not accounted for very well, and it's part of why we're losing everybody. People can't afford their houses because they're competing with companies to buy for employees, and they're competing with vacation, but they're competing with, such extreme wealth that it's really a challenge. And I never see that in the UHERO numbers. So I can send you an email, but I would like to see those things compared.
Yeah, I'm not sure what specific data we have to understand that
who lives
that distribution across. Yeah, I will talk to my colleague who works on tax issues, and I know he can also talk with people at DOTAX, but much of that data is quite confidential, so in terms of digging into that is quite difficult to understand. But we can have a look at things like, say, cost of housing versus wages, and
well, it's a glaring problem.
How that varies across the islands too.
It's a glaring problem, and I feel like neither state nor county policy really knows how to deal with it because we don't have the data.
Can maybe send him a more clarified question on what he can look up for his data. Councilmember Bolasan.
The data showing that flat growth in tourism it's a stark experience when you talk to community members where the general consensus that tourism is way more than it was before in the sense of like attendance. Can you kind of explain that discrepancy?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a chart of tourism spending, the total amount of money that people spend. The number of visitors that are coming has still been going up, right? So we had Hawaii as a state had 10 million visitors in 2019, and that's the peak. We haven't gone back to that peak subsequently, but that growth continued over a very long period. So we had this big growth in the amount of spending in the 70s and 80s. Total spending has been relatively flat, but the number of people coming to Hawaii has still carried on growing. The rate of growth sort of slowed a little bit, but that means that each visitor is spending less and less and less than they used to be. So in the 80s, you had this, particularly also visitors from Japan that were very high spending visitors. They would often stay in resorts. They would do a lot of retail shopping while they're here. Nowadays, the yen isn't as strong as it used to be, and they don't have that retail spending power anymore. So actually Americans are spending as much, if not more, than what the Japanese visitors are spending. But we've gone from having that sort of high value kind of tourism to a mass market kind of tourism. And so yeah, you'll have a greater presence of visitors, but the total amount that they're spending, once you add up, the restaurants and hotels and so on, has been declining per visitor, which meant that the total spending has been relatively flat.
So would that spending also account in the taxes, the different new taxes that we've had relative to those years, meaning like general excise and TAT, and does that also include those numbers? Because I feel
yes, so
it does.
The TAT would come out of that, and so when you have this flat spending growth, if the TAT's been flat all that time, then you wouldn't have had any increase in revenue. Although there has been some increases in accommodations taxes and things like that have come out of that. So there would be a larger share of that that's perhaps coming to the state or to the counties than in 1989 because of the new taxes that have come in since then. But in general, there hasn't been much revenue growth from tourism either.
I know your report is more looking at data. Is there in your probably website have recommendations on economic things that could be done collectively?
So we do. I've done a couple of reports recently discussing the types of issues, and there have been. The argument that I've been making is that we need to have recognize that Hawaii is small and isolated, and this means that we're probably not going to be, Oahu's not going to be a Silicon Island. We can't. If we create tech startups here, what happens is those tech startups very quickly move to California when they can, because they need venture capital or whatever, right? So there are some that stay, and there are some that aren't. There are many that aren't, and there are a lot of examples of this where also taxpayer incentives have helped get these companies started, but in the long term, they don't really create any sort of jobs here. So I've argued for a more focused kind of strategy on the types of companies or industries that are more likely to remain, and then focusing on also what do those industries need, what are the conditions for those industries that are perhaps preventing them from growing more. So I did a study 2 years ago looking at what industries could Hawaii diversify into, and the main ones that came out of that were related to industries in a water transportation cluster, so this relates to freight and so on, and otherwise fishing and aquaculture. So why isn't there more, say, offshore aquaculture in Hawaii? There's various regulatory hurdles to this. There's lots of different factors that I don't understand, and council members won't necessarily understand, and it's the people that are in those industries that really understand the barriers to them. So the next piece of work that I'm wanting to do on this is to help design a policy to help reveal what those barriers are, that people can come forward with proposals to say, hey, this is what my industry needs in order to get off the ground, and the types of support that the state can provide can then be really targeted to those particular needs.
Last follow-up, and I'll look for 2026. You mentioned it's pretty much most likely flatline, hopefully, considering what may or may not happen in 2026. Can you kind of reiterate what you're looking at for 2026?
Yeah, so for now we're expecting recession for, say, the first half of 2026 and the recovery to start in the second half. Over the whole year there would be slightly positive growth, but only just, and could go either way. At the moment we're not predicting a recession for the US itself, but if the US were to go into a recession, then it would be a lot worse than what we're forecasting. Of course, if we also have if you have a stronger US, then perhaps it's even milder. And so far, it has been sort of our forecast since Q2. We've been predicting this sort of recession in Hawaii, but what's panned out is that the recession is milder than we were originally expecting back in Q2 because of the strength of the US economy. So if that strength continues and it continues to be reasonably resilient in light of all of these sort of headwinds that it's facing, then things could be more positive than what we're expecting.
Thank you.
Any other questions from the members? If not, anyone in the audience wishing to testify? I'll call the meeting back to order. Any final discussion from the members? Councilmember Cowden.
I just want to thank you for doing this. I want to express gratitude to the University of Hawaii for having the Economic Research Organization, because it's very valuable to business and government. I want to thank Councilmember Bolasan for having this on the floor. And usually I find when we have recessions, there's still generally some happy outcomes of it. You know, sometimes the happiness factor when things slow down here isn't all that bad. So that I'm sure there's silver linings that we're not talking about. Those silver linings wouldn't flow into our budget. You know, it's hard for us on our budget. But thank you.
Councilmember Bulasan?
Yeah, I also want to thank Stephen again for the second coming again this year and last year. Looking forward to a much stronger report next year. But we're all informed by data, ideally, and it wouldn't be possible to make good decisions here if it wasn't for organizations focused on getting the data done. So we really appreciate you guys' work. Again, this is for me personally and professionally, representing the community on this island. Getting this data helps me figure out what are we looking forward to, what we need to adjust. And then it kind of helps reaffirm or challenge some of the experiences that I'm having. One personal experience is just hearing how many small businesses are choosing to close. It is a tremendous amount, more than I've ever experienced in the last 5 years, even during the pandemic. And correlates with the challenges that is being faced with communities finding food. So when we see the business world not being able to retain their employees, not being able to support them, not being able to do things because of cost of living, but also seeing in this data that just generally our particularly main bread and butter doesn't grow, and spending is continuously not adapting. It really makes it hard, and for all of our small businesses out there and owners, how do we adapt and try to figure out ways to make it work? And so it also helps reaffirm, all the work that we're doing to help strengthen our local economy and make it more circular and allow things to stay within. There is still billions of dollars going around, and if we can keep the billions of dollars in the space, that is definitely a strategy, and hoping that we can continue to do that as a functional government here on Kauai. So thank you so much for your report.
I just appreciate the information. I mean, very detailed and overall, for especially with the job information and employment and continued support there overall. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me to present, and it's my pleasure also to take a closer look. I think at the neighbor islands and Oahu, where always Honolulu and Oahu kind of dominate the state, and it's quite a pleasure to also examine the neighbor islands where there's a lot of nuances and interesting things to consider that we don't necessarily consider all the time. So, thank you.
Yeah, no, thank you again for all the information. I think what you brought to us, we kind of know. I mean, how vulnerable Kauai is to tourism. I didn't realize how vulnerable we were to the U.S. economy. Majority of our visitors are all from the U.S., so U.S. economy goes down, our visitors industry goes down. We know what it's like when we didn't have any visitors, and we see how highly dependent we are on them. I don't have any solutions on how we can strengthen our economy. Maybe we got to look at more exports and not be so dependent on the U.S. I know you came from New Zealand. New Zealand concentrates a lot on exports around the world. It's a much bigger market, but I don't know. I mean, it just shows how vulnerable we are, and that's not even including any natural disasters that we get, like fire, or flood, or hurricane. So it's just good information to have, in the back of our head. And yeah, I guess we gotta know we're gonna be battening down the hatches coming in 2026, and we'll see how everything goes forward from there. So with that, anything to say? You had any last words?
I was just going to clarify about New Zealand's economy. New Zealand's also very specialized. It's just its specialization is food and agriculture and tourism. But if you look at just the dairy industry, that's 11% of GDP or something in New Zealand. So it's a similar kind of specialization problem. Tourism's actually a little bit more resilient than commodities. So Hawaii's economy was more vulnerable in the past when it was specialized in pineapples and sugar than with tourism, right? It's less subject to this kind of commodity price shocks. That's really an external market that it can't dictate much about. So tourism's a bit more resilient than that, which also means it's probably not going away, but it means we do need to find something that helps to generate growth, because tourism hasn't been giving us that growth for a long time.
Okay, with that, motion on the floor is to receive. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Those opposed, motion